There we go. We're live. So now I have permission to do the live streams. I did not last week because I had just set up the channel. Now we are live streaming to YouTube as we speak. That means as soon as class is over tonight, and even right now, but immediately it will be available. All the warts included, all the hiccups and burps and screw ups that I might be making here in the next 4 hours, but at least it's there immediately. And that's my goal, is to have that for you. Not so that you can miss class and not have any guilt about it, but just so that you can go back through and slow things down, because I always welcome your questions. Please put them in the chat. Please even unmute and speak out. But sometimes you need just a little more time. You need just another rep or two. And we're going to be talking about some pretty complicated topics tonight. So this would probably be a good one for you to go back and rewatch and maybe take in a time or two in some other ways. Another suggestion that I think I might have made in Notion, but I don't remember. There's Notion. Who's been visiting it? We haven't developed it too much yet, but definitely revisit this. Go here, check out Notion, put your questions. It notifies me when you've done so, and I will make answers. I will give you an explainer of some sort. I might do an explainer video, or I might do one with just where I just type it out. But I suggested that you pay the YouTube Premium. I think it's like $13 a month or something. Upgrade your YouTube subscription so that you can turn off the screen on your phone and still hear the audio, because then you can be working out, driving, whatever you do that doesn't require your visual attention, and you can just be getting that extra repetition in your hearing, right, in your head. Whether it's me, whether it's our videos you're re-listening to, or some of the other stuff like Travis Everett or any of the other ones you might have found. There are several resources on YouTube for ways to get this audibly. Visually works for some people, audibly works for others, tactily taking notes can be effective as well. So use a little bit of all of those things. And if you don't already know the best way for your brain to remember things, figure that out early in this course over the next week or two. Figure out what is your best way to retain information. It might be a combination of those things. For math, it's probably pen to paper, working things out. But some people are more visual than others. And thank you. You guys have been doing it. Go ahead, if you haven't yet, put your name in the chat for me. I think everybody has. You're a step ahead of me. I appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit of a review about license law. Now, this is something that I won't say very often. Hang on a second. Oh no, my life is over. I don't have my cell phone within arm's reach. How did that happen? It's okay. I don't need it, but you do. Bring out your cell phone. I know, don't do it very often, but we're going to do it tonight. And what I want you to do is use your cell phone, or it might work to use your computer, but if you have a second computer or a laptop or an iPad or something. But if you go to the internet to kahoot.it, right there, www.kahoot.it. It might take a minute, might be a little cumbersome at first. Don't do kahoot.com. And if it asks you to like join or sign in, you don't have to do any of that. If you go to kahoot.it, it should just give you a field where you can put in this 7-digit number. That's all I need from you. Use a device other than what you're on now, phone, iPad, another computer. There it is. Some people are doing it. Kahoot.it, plug in the game pin. You don't have to name yourself your actual name, by the way, for future reference. You can be completely anonymous, doesn't matter. But what this is just an educational quizzing application. It gets a little more fun because it's timed. So the competitive streak in some of you might come out and it will keep score, but no score that matters as far as passing this course. It's just for fun. Good job. A lot of technology gurus in here today. No problems. If there are problems, you just let me know. We'll work through it. And then if some reason it goes completely sideways and you get kicked out or you can't sign on or or something happens, don't worry. The value in this is the explaining, and we'll be going over it all together. But it's just an extra element of kind of fun and participation to have the sign in and the scoring. And I think you can still sign up once we start going. So I'm going to kick it off and start this thing. It is timed. I think I've given you enough time, but we'll just have to see. So at first it's going to show you the question nice and big, and then it's going to bump it a little bit smaller. Can you hear the music? No, it doesn't really matter about the music. But it's going to bump the question smaller up at the top. And we're going to run out of time on this one, but at least this will kind of show you how it works. The license law and commission rules encompass the state portion of the PSI exam, true or false? And that is true. The state portion of the exam includes the license law and commission rules. Now, some of the questions might be a little awkward, might be clumsily written, because it's me who did them. It is my fault, and I accept responsibility. Sometimes I do it on purpose. Sometimes it's ambiguous because I want your brains to be working, and it's not the way you'd necessarily see it on, it's okay, Gregor. The way you'll see it on the PSI. It's just purely to get the information in your brains at this point. So let's go to the next one. All right, we have some scores rolling in. The scores are a combination of the right answer and how fast you answered it. So that's kind of how the scoring seems to work. But again, it doesn't count for any sort of grade or anything. Just for fun. Okay. Okay, so on your devices, you'll see that it's just going to give you the answer options like red, blue, yellow, green. Your device won't include the question. You have to look on the screen here to see the question, just FYI. The pin is at the very bottom center. It is 263-3000, 263-3000. And so this question is this: you must get a real estate license to do all of the following except what? Now that I've kind of explained everything, I will do better and be quicker about reading the question to you as you're looking at it on the screen. But let me get that pin, 263-3000. There it is in the chat in case you still need it. You must get a real estate license to do all of the following except what? All right. If you're helping grandma buy a house and not expecting any payment, then you don't need a license. So be real careful when you see a question on this or on the test that has the word accept in it, because sometimes your brain is not keeping up and it's like, well, no, this is the rule. Yes, but we asked what is not the rule. The word accept means tell me the opposite of what the actual rule is. So look out for that. The other choice was manage your friend's apartment complex for free rent. Let's see here. What's the difference there? It's a long time since I wrote these questions. Manage your friend's apartment. That looks like the same as helping grandma buy a house as a favor. So y'all give you equal credit for either one of those. And then sell your friend's home for a flat fee. That's obviously doing real estate for another for money, which requires the license. And then negotiating your friend's house for a commission, that's another one. So it's actually red or blue. I need to revisit this. Okay, this time I'm going to read off the question to you. Oh, we had some upsets in our scoring. All the following are types of broker's licenses except what? All of the following are broker's licenses except what? So is a provisional broker's license an actual thing? Non-provisional? Broker in charge? Is that a type of broker that's in the world? Or I'm broker than I was a year ago? You got it. Good job. All three of those things are 3 of the 6 kinds of broker's licenses we learned about. We learned about provisional, and then once you get rid of your provisional status by taking the post-licensing, you become non-provisional. And then once you're non-provisional and you have at least 2 years full-time experience, you can become a broker in charge. Another one that's not on this page or this screen is a broker in charge eligible. And then another one is an limited non-resident commercial broker's license. And that's the case where it's a company that wants to send their real estate person to North Carolina to do some real estate. They don't want them to have to get a license. They just want them to come here and do it. Well, how do we make sure they don't break laws and rules of North Carolina? They have to be sponsored, or they have to have a North Carolina broker that they work under that makes sure that they follow the correct rules and laws. And then a firm license. A firm license is another kind of license that is part of this whole system. Oh, just a little bit of a switch. Okay, here we go. Once you pass the exam, your license is immediately what? Once you pass the exam, your license is what? Is it active? Is it inactive? Does it allow you to drive a tractor trailer, or is it expired? Which one is it? It's going pretty fast. Is it going a little too fast so that I can go back later and adjust? Just let me know. It's partly for a reason too. But good job. Almost every one of you got that. Once you pass the PSI exam, meaning we've passed the class exam, you've replied to the real estate commission, paid them $100. Then they've told PSI it's good for her. Now she can sign up to take the PSI exam. In other words, sort of the state administered exam. Then PSI and you will talk. You'll pay them $56 and you can take that one. Once you have taken and passed that, they will tell the real estate commission, yes, she passed. Yes, he passed. The commission will then look at the background search results that have come in the meantime, because you ordered your background search, and that will be something that you'll do here in about another couple of weeks, at around the midpoint of the term, our course here. They will look at that. They'll do like a character check and see if there's anything that they have a problem with based on the background search. Then they will issue the license to you. That license will not be active. It will not be an active license. It will be inactive. It will be a provisional inactive license, which means you can't sell any houses yet. You can't sell any real estate yet. You're going to have to do something in order to activate it. And tell me in the chat, what is it that you will have to do? What activates your license? Yeah, hang it with a BIC. Pick a BIC. Pick a firm. Have that broker in charge of that firm you have chosen to tell the real estate commission that you're affiliating with them. That is the step that we're talking about on this slide. So your license is initially is in inactive status. A little bit of a shake up. Fernanda's on fire. What does it take to change your initial provisional license status from inactive to active? I've kind of stepped on my toes a little bit here, and that is okay. So you tell me, easy points. What does it take to get from inactive to active status when you first get your license? Paying the money, affiliating with a firm, taking 90 hours of post-licensing, or asking your mom's permission? It's the affiliation, isn't it? Affiliating with that firm. Good job. Now, yes, you do have to take 90 hours, but that is not the first thing you do. That's not the thing that gets you from inactive to active. It's the thing you have to do within 18 months of getting your license. What if you already associate with a BIC? Well, you wouldn't be associating with the BIC until you have gotten the license number, until you've actually been given a real estate license. But if you're talking about are you the one who works for a firm already? Okay. Well, in terms of having your license, then you would declare that current firm. I imagine you're going to be staying around there, and maybe that's part of why you're doing this. So as far as the commission is concerned, they don't know who you're hanging your license with, right? So you would do like everyone else would do. Yep. It's just going to be your own firm. The BIC that you have now is going to be telling them, look, he's with me now. In terms of his license hanging. Okay. Once licensed, a provisional broker must do what? Once you're licensed, provisional broker then has to do what? What happens after you get your license? It doesn't matter if you're affiliated with a firm or not. This is the thing that you have to do regardless. Got that license, the clock has started to tick for this next task. Do you have to take 90 hours of post? Yep, you bet. None of you failed that one. Good job. It's not CE, it's post. Do you have to affiliate with a firm? No, you don't. Once you get your license, you can remain inactive. You do not have to affiliate right away. But you do have to go ahead and get that post done within the 18 months because the clock is ticking, whether you're activated or not. And then eventually you'll probably have a fancy photo made for your business cards. Non-provisional brokers may write legal language into blanks of a standard offer to purchase. Do we just fill in the blanks, or can we actually write language? If we see the word language or drafting language, that should raise a red flag. That should make us think, oh, wait, no, am I an attorney? No, not an attorney. Therefore, I've all but given you the answer there, right? So no, we cannot write language in those blanks. That's referring to legal language. You can't practice law. You can just fill in the blanks with the stuff that goes in the blanks, but you can't get super creative. If it's just one little blank that's supposed to have like the address in it, you don't just go crazy and say, provided that notwithstanding that in the event of this and that and the other, you don't do your best in attorney interpretation or impression. It is okay to pay an unlicensed person for business as long as they are related to you. True or false? It is okay to pay an unlicensed person for business as long as they are related to you. Is that true or false? Good job. The only people we can pay for business because they sent us a lead is someone who has a real estate license. I talked to somebody about that yesterday. I got an old phone call from an old client and that came up, and I had to let him know, look, I'd love to be able to, but I can't pay you a referral fee unless you have a real estate license, right? So it can't be like, you gave me this lead, therefore I'm giving you this money. That's not allowed unless they have a license. It's probably the most underappreciated benefit of having a real estate license. It's really enough that makes it worth going through this whole thing. It's enough just to be able to get referral fees. Did I tell you about that kind of older second career guy I had in a CE class? I taught a CE class, and there was an older gentleman, and he was doing this as his second career. He had been in the business already 2 or 3 years at that point. He had never shown a house or listed a house, but he was making money in real estate because what he did do, and this was his only plan. He got the license, and then he spent about $25,000 on radio and TV ads to get the phone ringing and got leads coming in, which he then referred out to people in the office. And he just sat back and made referral fees. And that's all he does every year. He made a little Zillow for himself. That's basically what Zillow is. It generates leads and sells them to real estate agents. Kind of unique. I'm kind of jealous in a way. Sometimes you run into the complications when you're showing and selling things, but he's done. He just has to create new business all the time to send out as referrals, right? But that's okay. He needs the license to get that referral fee, though. A provisional broker must do what? We're provisional. What do we have to do if we're provisional? Have a BIC before forming their own entity, not act independently, not bother their BIC any more than possible, or tell their BIC that they deposited earnest money in time. What does a provisional have to do? What is the best answer? Yeah, pretty much not act independently. They have to be really tight with that broker in charge. They do not have to have a BIC before well, That red one is not a great answer choice in general because if they're a provisional, they can't form an entity. They can't even do that yet. They have to be non-provisional in order to pull that off. So that's sort of a nuance there that might easily throw some people. But yeah, it's not act independently. They have to be really close with their BIC, and that person needs to know what is going on in this provisional's business. The broker doesn't pay their fee, their renewal fee of $45 by June 30th. What happens next? Is their license expired? Is it inactive? Do they have to take extra CE, continuing ed? Or are they the next contestant on The Price is Right? They're expired. The money is about the word expired. Think about like that image on the question there, a parking meter. If you don't pay the meter, you're expired. You're not inactive. Inactive is about education and firm affiliation. Expired is about the money. It's an easy one to get and it's an easy one to miss. Go ahead and lock it in now and get it straight in your heads. A broker didn't complete their CE by June 10th. If you don't complete your CE by June 10th, what is true? Which one is true? Is it true that you can make it up between June 11th and June 30th? Take a CE real quick to make it up. Is it true that they should just give up and sell insurance? Or will the license go inactive on July 1st? Or will the license go inactive on June 11th? Which one of these is true? Good job. Yeah, maybe they should give up and sell insurance, but none of the rest of these are true. Their license does not go inactive right away. You are still active from June 11th through June 30th. You cannot take any CE because they won't let us offer any. I wish they would, because it'd be a prime time to give it and get paid to teach it. But there's no CE allowed to be given. Sort of the commission, they're trying to reset for the new license year. They're processing everybody who has taken the classes and getting all squared away for the new fresh license year coming up. A provisional broker could become non-provisional as soon as they can finish all 3 30-hour classes. You finish those 3 30-hour classes, you go from provisional to non-provisional. True or false? That's a quick one. I think I gave you more time than you needed on this one. That is true. I put a kind of nice soft focus word in here to cover my assets. Could become non-provisional as soon as they finish. The steps are this. The provisional broker takes all 3 30-hour classes post-licensing, those 301, 302, and 303. Once they take each one, those completions need to be reported to the commission. So that's part of it too. But yeah, that's true. That go from provisional to non-provisional, you take the 3 30-hour classes. I know how it is though. When you're taking test questions, even this silly little quiz, you start looking over your shoulder. You start thinking, okay, where's the trick? They're trying to trick me. I just know it. And sometimes you'll get the wrong answer because you're overthinking it. Sometimes it is as simple as it looks. When do you have to report that you were convicted of a crime? A broker must report a criminal conviction to the Real Estate Commission by when? Within 10 days, within 60 days, before your court hearing, or before it hits the newspaper? The criminal conviction is the 60-day number. 60 days. You have 60 days. And I know why you got it. You're like, well, that's pretty serious. They probably want to know that sooner rather than later. I don't know why it's 60 days. What is the 10-day thing? What do you have to report to the commission within 10 days? If you change your name or contact information, address, you got to tell the commission within 10 days for a name change, within 60 days for a criminal conviction. Totally understand why you might get confused about that, because I would have expected the opposite as well. A broker must report a change of address to the real estate commission by when? Kind of already know. And this is actually how it could go for you in the test. Sometimes if you skip a question, maybe another question down the road a little bit will help spur your memory for the one that you were confused about. So, change of address within 10 days, 60 days, before the mail, or before the neighbors realize that they left in the middle of the night. You got it. Change of address, change of name, that sort of thing is 10 days. A broker must report a criminal accusation to the real estate commission by when? When you're accused of a crime, you have to tell the commission within 10 days, 60 days before the court date, or 60 days from when it becomes a conviction. Which one might it be? There you go. Had to do a little bit of acrobatics on this one to make a good answer for it. But yeah, if it becomes a conviction, then you would have to tell them about the conviction within 60 days. So good job. You don't have to, in other words, you do not have to report an accusation. A criminal accusation is something that does not have to be reported, or an arrest for that matter. 4 hours of continuing education may be counted as your post-licensing time requirement. True or false? Can you count your CE toward your post-licensing requirement, education requirement? Does CE count toward your post, or does your post count toward your CE? Does CE count toward post, or post toward CE? Neither one counts for the other. You take any CE that will give you any credit toward your post classes, and you can't take, none of those 90 hours of post licensing will count toward your CE. BIC, let's say I'm looking in the chat. BIC CE can count for your CE to be active. So if we're talking about just continuing education, if you are a broker in charge or BIC eligible, then the update portion, the 4-hour course called the update, would be a BIC up, broker in charge update, rather than a general update or gen up. So in that case, yeah, your BIC CE counts towards your CE requirement because you are either a BIC or BIC eligible. I don't know if that's what you're asking. Okay, that's another one. That's sort of a side note, and it might actually be one of these next questions. Once you get your license, Ben makes a point here, which is kind of a nice little perk to have a fresh, brand new license. You've learned all the laws and the rules. There's nothing for you to get out of CE, really. So why should you have to go through that first CE? So you get to skip it. Once you get your license, whatever your very next June 10th is, whichever year of June 10th is coming up after you get your license, you do not have to take CE by that date. That June 10th, you get to skip. You get to skip your first June 10th. It's a good point. Oh, had an upset. Here we go. Almost done. You must take 2 4-hour CE electives by June 10th yearly. You must take 2 4-hour continuing education electives by June 10th yearly. True or false? That is not true. It's not 2 electives. It's an update. and an elective. It's one update and it's one elective. I know. Pause to hate on me. I get it. But that is kind of how they could do it. You got to be careful about the words. It's not 2 electives that you need by June 10th. It is one elective that is a 4-hour class, and then it is an update, a general update or a BIC update, one or the other. So it's an update and an elective. The commission might do any of the following to a broker except what? So in other words, which of the following things is something the commission will not do to a broker? Will they not revoke their license? Will they not suspend their license? Will they not reprimand, or will they not tickle the broker? The tickling department of the Real Estate Commission is on the 2nd floor. You got it. No tickling with the Real Estate Commission. They can revoke, they can suspend, they can reprimand, they can also censure. They can fine one type of licensee, but none of the others. There's only one kind of licensee that can be fined, but for the most part, what we usually say about fining in the Real Estate Commission is that the Real Estate Commission does not fine licensees, except for this one kind. What kind is it? I might be stealing my own thunder for the next question. I don't remember. Which licensee, which part of the business is the licensee that could get fined possibly by the Real Estate Commission? And the amount would be $500 per violation, by the way. Not a big.
Timeshares.
There it is. Thank you. Who said that? Okay, thank you, Matthew. Timeshare developers need a real estate license, and a timeshare developer has to adhere to the Timeshare Act. They have to do the timeshares correctly. They have to issue like a statement, and they have to do all sorts of proper things to make sure that they comply with the laws and rules of a timeshare. If they have a violation of those things, they could be fined by the Real Estate Commission. The timeshare developer is the person with a real estate license who could get fined. If all you're ever doing is property management or sales or rentals, then you won't ever be fined by the Real Estate Commission. It's only if you're a timeshare developer that you could get fined by the commission.
I do have a question.
Sure thing.
So I think I missed something on the first one. So when it talks about managing your friend's apartment complex for free rent, wouldn't you need a license for that because you're doing it for something of value?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. In my head, in the moment, for some reason, I was just seeing it in the other way, and I was thinking I had to rewrite the question, but thank you. You saved me, and I'm glad you mentioned that and spoke up. That is actually consideration. Free rent is consideration, so you're exactly right. That first question, we had 2 choices. We had one choice was helping your grandma buy a house as a favor, in other words, for nothing, or helping your friend manage their apartment complex for free rent. Okay, so one of them has a consideration in the form of the free rent. So you're right. Yep, you got it.
Thanks.
See, I've taught this thing dozens of times. I've been through this business 26 years, and it still flips around backwards in my head sometimes. So don't feel bad. You've got to just stop, take your time, and read the question for what it is. And don't be afraid of the skip to the next question button. The Real Estate Commission fines guilty brokers based on their commission earned. True or false? Real Estate Commission fines brokers based on the commission they earned. Is that true or false? Good job. They do not fine us at all, and it's not based on commission earned. It's based on nothing. In fact, it is never based on commission earned. The only time they fine is when it's a timeshare developer, and that fine is $500 per violation. How many commissioners are on the Real Estate Commission? How many actual commissioners are on the board of commissioners? Right? How many of them are there? They're appointed, by the way. They're not elected. How many of them? 7, 9, 3 that are non-brokers, or 2 that are active in real estate? Best answer. Good job. 9 of them. There's 9 of them. What is it about the number 7? That's how many the governor would appoint. 1 by the state house, 1 by the state senate. Then the other numbers here, 3, that's backwards. There must be 3 that have licenses, and then there must be at least 2 that are not in real estate at all. Who appoints 7 of the real estate commission members? The mayor, the governor, the state house, or your mom? There's your mom. She is so sweet. Coming in hot on this one. Don't you hope that when you're taking the PSI, they give you the answer to the next question before you go to it? Who appoints 7 of them? That's the governor. Good job. Two more. A non-licensed person can do what? Actually, the way it's worded is can do all of the following except what? So we're looking for the one thing out of this list that they cannot do. A non-licensed or unlicensed person is not allowed to do which of these things? They're not allowed to show rentals. They're not allowed to prepare pre-printed forms for licensees. They're not allowed to show houses for sale, or they're not allowed to enter data into the MLS. Good job. They're not allowed to show houses for sale. An unlicensed person is allowed to show rentals, and they are allowed to prepare pre-printed forms for licensees. That's hard to say 3 times fast. They are allowed to enter the data into the MLS. But they can't show things for sale because the conversation might easily go to like a negotiation kind of thing. Oh, they're asking 220. Would they take 200? Oh, I can't talk to you about that. I'm unlicensed. Talk to my BIC. But the commission says it's okay with us if they can show rentals because people don't usually try to negotiate for rentals. A limited non-resident commercial broker may not do what? Limited non-resident commercial broker. Which of the following can they not do? They cannot come to NC from another state. They cannot write offers for office complexes for sale. They cannot work under the supervision of a broker. They cannot write multiple offers on single-family residential homes. There you go. They can't do residential. Right? They're a limited non-resident commercial broker. What they can't do is residential real estate. Good job. All of those other things are part of what they must do. They're coming from another state. They can't be a resident in North Carolina. They're coming here in order to do real estate, which would be the yellow one. And then they have to do all of it under the supervision of a North Carolina broker. That's it. Good job, guys. Let's see who won. The winner gets $500 from the person next to them in the Zoom window. So good luck collecting that. I wish you the best. Fernando. Wow, good job. That was tight. Pretty close. Okay. Now, let's dive into Unit 1 and get some of this Level 1 information handled. Most of this Unit 1 is all about definitions. It's almost entirely Level 1 stuff, not Level 2 or 3. But then we get to Chapter 2, and that's a little bit of a different story. There we go. That's what I want. Almost. Not quite. Sorry about that. There's no consistency to this multiple monitor setup and PowerPoint. Every time, I just never know what's going to happen. That's what we want. Okay, we got it. Okay, so basic concepts, chapter 1. Hopefully that was pretty easy on you. Because it's just definitions, just words. What is real estate? We're going to talk about sort of the business of real estate. What are the different characteristics of real property, classes of property, economic and physical characteristics, land use and investment. And remember, again, this is all very, very surface level. We're not getting too much of a deep dive into this. Most people who aren't in the business just use all these words interchangeably. They use the word land for real estate, for real property, real estate. And then those three words on the left are kind of mixed and swapped out for each other concerning real estate. The one on the right is what? We're going to learn what personal property means compared to real property. Here's what we're dealing with. When we have a piece of property, putting a house on it would be an example of a surface right. If you have surface rights to use this property, then you can do stuff on the surface of it, right? Mind blown, right? If you have air rights, that's the air above it. What you own is the earth down to the center of the earth, theoretically, and then up to infinity up above. So you own surface rights, subsurface rights, and air rights unless you don't. You might sell those other things, or you could lease them. In Texas, for instance, you could lease to an oil company the rights to drill for oil under your property. You could have a farm and you do the farming, but then you've leased out the rights to an oil company to come in and put the machinery, that oil derrick thing that does that constant up and down motion, drawing that oil up out of your ground. But you've either sold the rights or leased them to that oil company. It could be oil, it could be minerals, it could be gas. Mineral, oil, or gas that you've let someone else have the right to pull out from underneath your property. You've given away, sold, or leased the subsurface rights. And then if you let somebody build up into the air above your property, that would be dealing with your air rights. So we're talking about three things here. Land is the dirt. It's the air rights, the surface rights, and the subsurface rights. When you hear the word land, that's what we're talking about. The word real estate is the same as land with some extra stuff added to it. So the difference between, again, land here and then real estate, the real estate also includes the improvements. The word real estate includes the houses, the garages, the shops, the driveways. What other kinds of improvements might there be? Give me some more examples of improvements. Say the word improvement. I'm improving the lot, improving the land. Yeah. Fixtures, things that you're attaching. Pool, that's a good one, Matthew. You got it. Utilities, adding utilities, sure. What about a shed? Yeah, a shed. If you have a pool, for instance, you probably are going to have to do what else? Add what else around that pool for safety's sake? Maybe for a zoning requirement, a fence. That's a good one. A fence is another improvement too. You got it. So man-made improvements to the surface is what is real estate. Still includes the air rights, surface rights, subsurface rights, plus the improvements also. And then the other word, real property. What is real property? It's all of that same stuff in real estate, plus the legal part, the legal rights. And it's a little bundle of sticks here in the slide, and that just is sort of like a bundle of legal documents that constitute what rights you have in the property. What can you do with it? What are you allowed to do with this real estate? So it's the land, it's the improvements on the land, and it's the bundle of legal rights that show what you're allowed to do with the property. That's the definition of real property. Real property is the all-encompassing everything, right? That's all of it together. We'll get more into that bundle of legal rights and what it actually means that you can do with it when we get over to chapter 2. Okay, so we've got real property, which, by the way, review real quick, is the land, the things attached to the land, also known as fixtures. I believe Gregor added that part. Good addition, because fixtures are huge in this business. And then also the rights that go with, or as you see here on the slide, they are appurtenant to the land. They go with it. They run with it. If you see the word appurtenant, one of those $5 words, that just means it runs with the land. Something appurtenant to the land is going to be there. It's going to stick with it. It could be a fence, but it could also be a legal right. So when you sell the property, and it has the part of owning the property means that your neighbor next door has to give you permission to let your driveway go across their property. That driveway easement is what's called an appurtenance. It's appurtenant to your property. When you sell the property to your buyer also gets to use that driveway because it is appurtenant to the property. An easement meaning permission for somebody to use someone else's land. Easements we're going to get more into in detail in a little while, but a driveway across your neighbor's land so that you can get from your property to the street would be a classic example of an easement. In North Carolina, you're not allowed to be landlocked. No parcel of real estate can be landlocked. Every property must have access to a right of way, access to the street. And if your neighbor's land is between you and the street, your neighbor has to have an easement across their land allowing you to get to the street. That's just part of it, or else you can't sell the property. You couldn't have bought the property without access. Another type of easement, by the way, since we're talking about it, would be the utility company having the right to go across part of your property to get to the power line that is on your property, or one of those green boxes at the street, or to dig up the gas line in your yard. All of those things involve a legal right that they have. They don't own your property. The utility company doesn't own your property, but they have a legal right to access at least a portion of it through that easement, because it's a utility easement. So all of those things are real property, but then what is personal property? It's everything that's not real property. So we have this cabin and this I'd love to live in this property. Have like 2 barns, whatever that shop is, with 3 bays and that cool metal roof building. All of that is real property. The trees, the shrubs, the fence, the driveway, the sidewalks. There's a lot of good stuff in this picture. All of those things are the real property, but then that nice, big, expensive John Deere can be driven off the property. It is not attached. It is personal. That's the movable stuff, right? All the fun toys that are probably in that barn there on the upper right of this photo are also personal property. That's what we're talking about. So what are some examples of personal property? You tell me in the chat. Personal property, movable things that are not attached, that are not real estate. A great one. What you might be sitting on right now. A couch. You got it. A desk chair. Yeah. Pictures on the walls. Perfect. Lawnmowers, furniture, cars, all that good stuff. Smoker. Yeah. And then what's an example of a permanent improvement? We kind of already talked about that. We got into fences and sidewalks and buildings, and could be street lights, things like that. So there are characteristics of real property. Again, real property is land, improvements on the land, and the legal rights that attach to that property. So the characteristics of real property, there are 3 physical characteristics, and there are 4 economic characteristics. Sorry, I'm going to sound like your grandma in church for a minute while I open this cough drop and make all kinds of noise that everybody turns around and looks, and they're like, shh, be quiet. This is the worst cough drop in the world because it doesn't release from the paper. Maybe someday I'll get it. It's not annoying either. It's just in your imagination. Okay, now my fingers are sticky. First world problems. Okay. Physical characteristics. Immobility. What makes real estate so attractive to lenders? Why do lenders give interest rates? Let's not think about what they are now. But 7's not that bad. But 2 was better. 2 3/4 what it was a couple of years ago. 3 and 4 what it was last year. Not bad interest rates. Why are they so low compared to your credit card or your car loan? Because it's not going anywhere. That sweater you bought on your credit card can disappear. It is personal property. That car can go to a whole nother country within a matter of hours, but that real estate is not going anywhere. It is immobile. It is also theoretically indestructible. Yeah, you could probably blow a big hole in it and make it harder to be used, but it's still there. It's still real estate, real property. And another physical characteristic that gives real estate its value is its uniqueness. I can buy a house on acreage, and it's the only house like that house on that kind of land, that exact piece of land with those trees and those fixtures and the lay of that land in the whole world. Yes, we've all been in some of these cookie cutter kind of neighborhoods where one house looks about the same as the next, but for the most part, everything is unique. They are different in some way or another. So physical characteristics of real property. They can't be moved, they can't be destroyed, and they are unique in and of themselves, like little snowflakes. Economic characteristics of real property include scarcity. What are the characteristics of real property that affect it economically? The fact that scarcity can affect its value. We're seeing that still right now. As of April, the market started to kind of shift a little bit, but it's still a seller's market, guys. It's still the case that there aren't as many houses as there are buyers. Although I am seeing prices come down. They are changing, but that's sort of more of an element, I think, and product of the interest rate situation. But still, if there's not enough of something that people want, people are willing to pay more to get them. You got it. Perfect. Thank you, Fernanda. Less inventory, more value. It's the classic law of supply and demand, right? Location affects the value of a property. I live on 5 acres in Cabarrus County in Concord. If I owned 5 acres on the lake shore of Lake Norman, that would be worth more than what it is here with me now, right? Location, 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 right? The 3 most important rules or words in real estate. It's all about where it is. I once had a client my first year in the business, and she lived in a normal kind of production home, like a tract home, so to speak, a house that they could build in like 3 or 4 months because they order things in bulk and they throw them up really fast and they all kind of look alike. At the time, I think it was worth about $150,000. She lived there with her family. There's nothing wrong with that neighborhood, just fine. She hired me to help her sell it, and we didn't get offers for as much as she was hoping for because it was worth what it was worth. Her problem was she cleaned houses for a living in Myers Park, and she was struggling to understand why those Myers Park houses were worth so much more than her house. And so that was a lesson in location. It's because that's Myers Park, and there's only so much of it. You can't just go out 20 miles further out and still call it Myers Park. I'm talking about the neighborhood, the age-old neighborhood with historic big trees and near downtown Charlotte. Every city, town has an area like that, right? It's only so big and everybody wants to be in it. Another one in Charlotte that kind of has a lot of, that's kind of sought after is Madison Park, and then Dilworth. You might have heard of some of these names. So yeah, location matters big time. Improvements, that's something you can do something about, right? You can't pick up and move your house. You can't change the location, but you could add to it. You could add improvements to it that would help increase the value. And then the fact that it is there for the long term, permanence. The word permanence affects the value of your property because it's going to be there a while, hopefully, right? We'll talk more about the uniqueness word in future chapters. Another characteristic of real estate in terms of land use and investment is this term. We'll see again when we get to valuation, but it's called highest and best use. In other words, what is the highest and best use for this piece of property at any given time? Every property has one. There is one highest and best use for your property you're sitting in right now. And it may not be what you're using it for. In my case, that is the case. That's what's going on here. I'm in an old house on 5 acres and it's zoned industrial. I am not using my property to its highest and best use. If I were, that would mean maybe I put a mini storage business on here. That'd be a better use because there's apartments nearby or office buildings that for rent, like a commercial property, like commercial properties for rent. That'd be the highest and best use. I could probably make the most money by using it in those ways. But all property, all real property has a highest and best use at any given moment. That does not mean that it can't change. Once upon a time, this place where I live, its highest and best use was residential because it was zoned residential and everything around it was, and it was farmland and houses. And then this city came in to us. They took over. We were not in the city limits when I was little, when I was growing up, but the city limits came and encompassed us too, eventually adding to the taxes that I have to pay. So in other words, how will I make the most money? What is the highest and best use? We'll see it again in chapter 13. What can you do with the property? If you see a sign like this, anybody seen these signs? These zoning change signs as you're driving around? If it's safe for you to do so, and next time you're driving around and you see one of these signs, pull over and look at it closer. At the bottom, you'll probably see a website. You'll probably see some more information, something where you can go and look up what it is that's going to be changed. They're giving you notice. They're giving the public notice that they're going to change the usage of that property, or they're going to try to. They're going to present it before the zoning board and say, hey, we would like to change it from this to that, from agricultural to residential, from residential to commercial, from industrial to commercial, or vice versa. There's different codes and numbers that go with those different types of zonings. It might be R4. That would be a residential type of zoning. You might see LDR, low density residential, meaning low density per acre. In other words, you can't put very many houses on the property per acre. If you want to have a horse, you've got to have the property has to be zoned to allow for livestock to be on it, right? So land use restrictions, there's two main kinds of restrictions that could dictate what you're allowed to do with your land, your property. One of them is zoning, and that's public. You see the word zoning? It's about the government telling you what you're allowed to do. The reason there are zoning laws and zoning districts and areas is to keep people from making foolish decisions. If you could sell your 100-acre parcel to a developer of houses, you'd be probably happy to do that if you were done with it, if you just wanted to cash out. And most people might be okay with that. There are some people that would maybe be frustrated because they're going to think, well, that's great. That's the bunch more traffic. It's going to require more school burden because more kids go into the schools. But what if that 100 acres were going to be used for like a landfill or for like an asphalt plant or something not so pretty and nice? The idea of zoning is so that the landfill can't be put next to where we keep our grocery stores or where we keep our daycares, all right, or our houses. We want to have the ugly, smelly parts in this part of town over there, and then we want to have the part where people like to be and live and shop and play over here away from that stuff. So that's the idea of these public land use controls, making sure that we don't put our bathroom in the middle of our kitchen, so to speak. Another kind of land use restriction is a private one. Anybody who sells their own property could put a private restriction on that property. They could say, yes, I will sell you my property, but I'm going to put some covenants and restrictions on it. You're not allowed to do certain things if you buy this from me. I don't want this to I don't want it to be one of those cookie cutter neighborhoods. Therefore, if you buy this from me, you have to sign something saying that you're going to only use it at the most to maybe build 1 house per acre, but never like 10 houses per acre or 10 apartments or townhouses, something like that. So private land use controls could also be, when you build a house on here, it must be a brick house, not vinyl. It must be at least 2,000 square feet. I don't want a bunch of little tiny plastic vinyl houses. I want it to be brick, 2,000 or more square feet, single level only, anything you can imagine. Why would a seller do that? Who knows? Are they allowed to? Yes. But what is the downside of doing that? Well, they have to be willing to maybe not be able to sell to just any and everybody. They're limiting their buyer pool to only people who are going to be okay with only being allowed to build a 2,000 square foot brick single level home. And that's okay. They might be willing to wait for that particular buyer. In Unit 5, we'll get more into this concept of land use controls. Real estate as an investment. Advantages and disadvantages of real estate as an investment. The biggest disadvantage is that your money is not liquid. Just like the ice in this glass is not yet liquid. Give it a few minutes, it will become liquid. That's not the case for real estate. The more time goes by, it doesn't just become liquid. That's the one way that this image doesn't work so well. But liquid, when it comes to your money, means can you access it? Is your checking account more liquid than your house? Yeah, because you can write a check. You can swipe a card and spend that money immediately. That's the idea of liquidity, right? So real estate's not so liquid. If you want to get the money out of your property, you're probably not going to be able to do it right now, today. You're probably going to have to sell it in order to get that money out. Now, there's some other possibilities. Maybe you got something called a home equity line of credit. We'll talk more about in chapter 14, I think, which basically gives you the ability to write a check and pull the equity out of your house by swiping a card or writing a check. We're setting that little possibility aside, but real estate as an investment has wonderful advantages, but one of the disadvantages is the lack of liquidity. Advantages, though, include the fact that a lender is more willing to give you a lower rate because they are confident, they feel secure that you're not just going to steal it and drive it away in the middle of the night. You can't. It's immobile, right? And it can just sit there, and they know also that the lender's willing to loan you money on it because worst case scenario, if you stop making your house payment, they'll take it back from you. And then they'll have this asset that they can convert into cash by selling it to somebody else. It's easy to find. There's an address. It's right there, right? In the real estate business, there's all kinds of stuff we can do. Certainly general brokerage. That's kind of what most people start at when they get the license, at least. But you can also get an appraiser's license. And then that's your job, is going around doing research and telling people what properties are worth. We're going to talk a lot about the difference between an appraiser and a broker, and the appraisal, which is what an appraiser does, versus the market analysis, which is what we do. It's all kind of based on the same ideas, but an appraiser is usually better at it than we brokers are because that's all they do. We brokers do all kinds of other stuff. We're showing houses too, and marketing and putting things on the market, not just telling people what things are worth all day, every day. Property management, we've talked about that. Finance, property development, buying a piece of property and turning it into something different, right? Cutting it up, carving it up into different smaller lots and selling those off. Real estate counseling, real estate education, like we're dealing with right now. You're in here, I'm in here. And professional organizations. That's a big part of this business. You're going to start out probably belonging to this one, the realtor designation, the realtor association. You're going to subscribe. You're going to pay pay dues every year in order to call yourself a realtor. So all realtors are licensees, but not all licensees are realtors. Just because you have a real estate license doesn't automatically make you a realtor. You have to pay extra to belong to the organization called the NAR, the National Association of Realtors. When you see that blue R, that's what that's about. So we're a member of this organization. Because we're a member of this organization, the point of it is to elevate the industry. Yes, you have a real estate license. You know the laws and rules that the Real Estate Commission has decided that we must follow. But the association, the membership of the Realtor Association involves more than that. Yes, we got to protect the consumer. That's what the commission says. But with this R symbol, we also need to treat each other with a certain level of dignity and respect. We have to treat each other, brokers. We can't go after each other's clients. That would be against the code of ethics. And when you join, they will put you through some orientation and you'll learn about all those different codes of ethics, the ethics in the code. Another one that it was added just last year is, I think it's in 16, Article 16, that whether your personal or your business social media accounts, you cannot have any sort of hate speech. Can't write any sort of or utter any sort of hate speech in your social media. And I'm all about that life. I don't want people to talk about hating other people. The part that's going to be interpretive there is what is hate speech. And the reason I say that is if you Google Realtor Code of Ethics hate speech, you'll probably find the document that I found. And it was a document of 11 case studies from NAR. And out of those 11 case studies, 6 of them ended up, after the investigation, having been proven to be, yes, somebody did something wrong. It really was hate speech that person engaged in. And good, we caught them. We got it corrected. But 5 of them were innocent. And the reason I say that is this: be careful, because anybody can turn you in. Remember, it's your business social media, but it's also your personal social media. In times like right now, right? Today, or was it yesterday? Yesterday, election time, political stuff, any sort of thing that somebody's involved with. If somebody utters an opinion, whether on personal or business, and it's interpreted in a way that comes across as hate speech, you could get turned in. It could be that it's determined that wasn't in fact hate speech and you're off the hook, but you still had to go through it. You still had to go through the process and the investigation. So be careful. That's one of the codes of ethics items. Yes, thank you. The break. Where are we on the break? Okay, went a little bit past it. Let's go ahead and have our break, and I'll see you back in 10. Welcome back. We are back together. Let's bring it on in. We left off with the elephant, but not all licensees are realtors. You can be a realtor and you're a licensee, but you can't be a license. You can wait. What would it be? You can be a licensee without being a realtor, but you can't be a realtor without being a licensee. That is it. So, pop quiz. How many highest and best uses does a property have at any given time? How many highest and best uses? Yeah, there it is. Just one in the chat, in the screen, fingers up. All of that works fine. Yep, but it could change. The highest and best use today could be different in a year. Here's what supply and demand looks like. If the demand is going up and the supply is unchanged, the price goes up. Everybody wants it. Prices go up. If the demand is dropping and the supply is unchanged, then nobody wants it. Prices go down. If the demand is unchanged, supply goes up. There's too much of it now, so prices are going to go down, and then the opposite. Supply's down, there's not enough of it, so prices go up. The real estate market is affected by lots of different things. Factors affecting the supply in real estate include the labor force, businesses coming into an area, construction cost. We saw that last year when the price of lumber went up 3 or 4 or 5 times as much as what it had been. Government controls can affect supply. Financial policies that are passed could affect supply. And then things that affect demand include population changes, who's living someplace, like demographics, like income levels, things like that, employment, wage levels. The real estate market includes lots of different things. Residential, which is what most people start as. Then they might branch out into commercial if an opportunity presents itself, or you might live in a rural area and get into agricultural or farmland or horse property. I've had a few horse clients before, and boy, if it's somebody that's got horses, you take them to that property, they get out of the car, and an hour later, they have not even looked at the house yet. They've been walking the pastures. They're making sure the grass is right. They want to see the barns before they care about the house. They'll live in a shack as long as that barn is right and the pastures are right. Industrial, in the commercial sector, there are very few general brokerage commercial agents. In other words, if you're in commercial, you're probably in a very specialized niche. Your thing might be office buildings or industrial complexes or agricultural. By the way, land is considered a commercial part of the business. And then if it's 5 or more family units, if it's a 5 or more family unit, it's considered commercial. Residential is considered a 1, 2, 3, up to 4 family unit, like a townhouse, like a building with 4 townhouses in it would be a residential. But a 5 or more type of a multifamily is considered commercial. And then there could be special purpose real estate needs. Could be an old post office that needs to be sold. It's kind of hard to figure the value on a post office that's no longer needed. It's old. There's not a neighborhood of post offices that you can rely on and see what similar ones have sold for. You've got to do something called the cost approach to figure out what it's worth. So special purpose needs in real estate. We've talked about this already. We're going to see some overlap in our license law and commission rules with some of the units from the book. And here's one of those places. You know this. I've hammered it into your head in just the 1 week, right? There's one license. It's called a broker's license. There's different statuses of this broker's license. There's a provisional status. There's a non-provisional status, right? There's BIC, broker in charge. There's BIC eligible. But you need that license if you're going to do real estate for someone else for compensation. And it requires an active license. You can have the license, but if it's not active, you may as well not have the license. You can't make money in real estate. I had a guy in a class 3 or 4 years ago. He took my pre-licensing class. He passed it. He got in the business. He did great. But he called just the other day. He texted me like 2 days ago and he said, hey, would you let me pay you a fee and then just put my house on the MLS for me? I don't want like the full listing. I don't want you to do everything you normally do for a listing. I just want you to put it on the MLS for me. Basically be what's called a limited service broker. And I'm my own show. I can do whatever I want. And I chose to, yeah, I'll do that for you. No problem. We'll work out the details later. But I said, well, what happened to your license? Are you not active anymore? And he said, well, I got a promotion at my job. It was paying something that I just couldn't turn down. So I let the license go inactive. So he just had it like 2 years and he went ahead and already had let it go inactive. Hopefully he's still paying his $45. Why do I say that? What could happen if he stops paying his fees, his dues, his $45 for it for 2 years or more? What happens? What do you have to do if you don't pay the money for 2 years or more? You're back here with me. Yeah, you got to go from the beginning. So never stop paying the money, right? That's the lesson there. You can stop doing the education. You can go inactive. And in order to get back active, it's just going to be a certain amount of education you have to take to get back in action, right? Might be a handful of CEs, maybe another post over again, something like that. Depending on how long you were inactive, you just have to take classes in order to get back up and running again. But the money can put you all the way back to this point. Nobody wants that. That is it for chapter 1, guys. It is short and sweet. It is definitions. Just level 1, just hammer them, make flashcards, or use the Quizlets app to, you could probably find them already made because this book is so prevalent. Just look up this book, 10th edition, in Quizlets, and you will have probably some good flashcards to use. Or make your own. I think the magical part of flashcards is in making them yourself. I once took a chemistry class, poor me, in college, and that professor said, hey, here's the good news. I'm going to let you bring an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and anything you can fit on that piece of paper, you can bring with you to class for the exam. I never wrote so small in my life. It was an art. It was a work of art. And this was in the 90s, guys. So I think I might have even printed out in like 4-point font, or the lowest I could even possibly read, to have as much stuff crammed on that page as I could possibly get. But you know what I didn't need during that exam? Everything I put on that page, because I went to such extensive measures to fit it on there. I learned it, right? I wrote it on there. That was probably a nasty little trick that he knew was going to happen. So I don't know why I just told you that, but I guess the lesson there is write things because you'll learn them. We're heading into syllabus section 2, which is going to be both chapters 2 and 3 in your textbook. You can kind of see how this is going to be working. I'm going to show you the syllabus and show you the units in the textbook. It's a bunch of stuff. The level 1 are some deep dive into what that bundle of legal rights includes. Something called fruits of the soil, estates in real property, in other words, how you own stuff, and then trusts. The level 2, again, is more than just definitions. It's more of a hands-on level of understanding. What are water rights? What are support rights? What are improvements to land, and what's the difference between a manufactured home and a modular home. And then the different types of ownership. How can we own things in real property? That's a good question, Gregor. Let me see here. Anytime somebody asks how much time you should spend on something, my first thought is this. Let's come on over to the Relink book. Go to pages 16 and 17 and just see where is chapter 2, okay? Chapter 2, section 2, I should say, in the syllabus, property ownership and interest, 4 questions on the national, 1 question on the state. You're gonna need to learn it, obviously, because if it's that one question and your success or failure is about one question, it was this question, you need to know it. I think this chart is more useful when it comes time for review. And you have limited time to review, then you're going to be wanting to spend more time on the double digits than the single digits, right? But that is a fair question. There's just a lot in chapter 2. No, they'll never be true or false. He's asking, would the test question be set up as true or false? What you'll also find in the Relink book is how those questions are written. And it's going to be like this. It's going to be a 4-answer option. Which of the following? Might be A, B, C, or D. It might be 1, 2, 3, or 4. But it's going to be a question and which of the following, which of the 4 is the right answer. You'll notice out of these 3 examples of how the question could be, none of them is that annoying Roman numeral thing. You remember, have you ever taken a test where it said Roman numeral 1, this answer, Roman numeral 2, that answer, or is it only 1, is it only 2, is it both, or is it neither? So it's not going to have that Roman numeral nonsense. It could say which of the following, all of the following are a type of economic characteristic except, and you're going to need to flip your brain and think, okay, we're looking for the one that's not an economic characteristic of real estate. So just be watching out for the word except, but it won't be a true or false. And the class exam is the same way. The class exam gives you 4 choices of answers. It won't be like a fill in the blank or a true or false or anything like that. And they'll never ask you what is the rule A511. They won't give you like a rule address, I call it, and ask you what that rule is. You don't need to know them by address. You just need to know what the rules are about. And then, okay. And then the big level 3 in this whole chapter is about fixtures. And what is it? And how do we figure out if it's a fixture or not? This is a big one in real life. Actually, in the wild of this business, more disputes happen over fixtures than probably anything else. Was the seller supposed to take the chandelier from the dining room with them? Did they get permission in the contract to take it? If not, then it needs to stay because it's a fixture. So we're going to get more into what that means. So this concept of property. We've talked about how real estate is unique. There's a uniqueness to it. Therefore, there are some laws and rights involved because of the uniqueness of real estate. And we need to understand how those laws affect property. What's the effect of those laws? Here's your first acronym. I don't think we've had any acronyms yet. Your first one is the acronym that is Deep C, D-E-E-P-C. So these are the rights of ownership. These are what's encompassed in this concept of the bundle of legal rights. You have the right to disposition, to dispose of it as you wish. Dispose, sell it. You can get rid of it, give it away, sell it. That is a right you have when you have property. You have the right to sell it if you want to. You have the right to enjoy it pretty much however you want to, but obviously there's zoning laws, there's city ordinances like fireworks, things like that. But for the most part, you have the right to do with it as you wish. You have the right to exclusion. In other words, you can put up a fence and keep people out because it's yours. You can exclude people and decide who gets to come onto your property. You have the right to possession. It's yours. Nobody can come in and take it from you legally. And you have the right to control it. What does that mean? You can decide what goes on with this property. Do you want to take down part of the trees, half the trees? Do you want to build the house close to the road or back from the road? Do you want to build a second house on it if the zoning allows? Do you want to rent it out or rent out a part of it, or maybe an Airbnb, or maybe put like a small little tiny house on part of it and use that as a short-term rental thing if the zoning allows, by the way. So this bundle of legal rights includes all of the elements here in the acronym Deep C. Sorry, I have a little overlap here, but all it says is the same thing we saw before. Air rights, surface rights, and subsurface rights. Real property, again, to recap, is all of these things, plus the improvements, plus the bundle of legal rights. That is what real property means. A couple more terms. What about that stuff growing on the property? Sometimes it's just going to be there and it's going to keep coming back and you didn't do a thing about it. You can't take credit for it because that tree keeps coming back. It's still there. The leaves fall like they're doing now, then they're going to grow back in the spring. That is called fructus naturalis, Latin term, which means fruits of the soil. It's part of the real property. Doesn't require any cultivation. Doesn't require, have you ever heard of the term, she has a green thumb, she can make plants survive? Doesn't matter. Your green thumb isn't necessary. It's going to come back. Azaleas. Have everybody heard of the shrub azaleas? They come back. There are perennials. There are plants and shrubs and trees that are just there. Those are fruits of the soil. Those do not require cultivation. You don't have to plant your azaleas and your trees like you do corn, right? If you want to have corn, you got to plant corn. That's called fruits of industry. Fructus industrialis, or fruits of industry. The difference between crops like that and fruits of the soil is one is considered personal property and the other is considered real property. So if it's something that requires cultivation, you planted the corn, now you got to come back and harvest it and pick it. So if you run a farm or if you have acreage and you have a crop of corn on it, and then you sell that property while the corn is still growing, usually it's built in to the rights there that you can come back and pick it when it's time. You went ahead and closed. It is now not your property anymore, but because it is personal property, fruits of industry, fructus industrialis, you have the built-in right to come back and harvest that corn because you planted it, because it's considered personal property. So just think trees and shrubs are real property. Crops, corn, soybeans, things like that you plant require cultivation. That's personal property. Another word for fruits of industry you might have seen there in the book is implements. An appurtenance, we saw that word a minute ago. It means something that runs with the property, a right or privilege that is included. Because you own it, you have this right or this privilege. And it is part of that air rights, surface rights, and subsurface rights thing. In other words, one example would be that driveway easement. Because your property is away from the road and your neighbor is between you and the road, and if it weren't for the driveway that goes across your neighbor's land, you couldn't get to the road. Well, you're not allowed to sell property that is landlocked. Therefore, it runs with your land that the driveway easement gets to be on your neighbor's property, giving you access to the road. And whatever person you sell your property to gets that same right also. It's running with your property that you have sold. It's included. It's an appurtenant. It's an appurtenance to your property to have that easement in place, or any other right or privilege. It could be that because you own your property, you can, what else would be like a right or privilege that runs with the land? You can, all the things in deep sea that you're allowed to do, all of those things are included into what you can do with your property. What about how many owners, how many people could own one given property? Don't forget about the different rights that we talked about. There's air rights, there's surface rights, and there's subsurface rights. Therefore, you could sell off the air rights and the subsurface rights, and you keep the surface rights. So there could be 3 deeded owners, 3 people with deeds on this one property. This one property has 3 owners. Owner A owns the air rights, owner B owns the surface rights, and owner C owns the subsurface rights. You could also, instead of selling your interest in these things, you could lease it out, as we talked about in this case, like an oil rig, oil derrick kind of thing, where they're pumping the oil out. Maybe they have a lease, maybe they have an ownership, like a deed. When you see the word deed, just think of like the title to your car. The deed is a document that proves you own something in real estate. So you could have the deeded right to mine for minerals or oil or gas, either of the 3 or all of the 3. All of those, we're talking about transferring subsurface rights to someone. And they could be deeded separately. To transfer surface rights, you could do that too. The deed is about the surface rights. What can you do? You can have a house on the property. You can have a garage or a business on the property. And then air rights. You see this more like in a downtown setting. I believe it's Grand Central Station, and there's a bank that has the air rights over Grand Central Station to build their skyscraper over it. So Grand Central owns the surface rights. They have either leased or sold the air rights to whatever it is, the bank that built the building over top of it. And here's all the air rights kind of looking. We're seeing it go up into infinity and then all the way down to the core of the earth, theoretically. Subsurface, surface, and air rights could all be included together as well. That's kind of what we were used to seeing, but they could be separated. The word appurtenance relates to the rights associated with water. If you're on some water, whether it's a stream or a lake or a river or a gigantic lake or the ocean, there are water rights we're going to learn about here in a moment. There's also something called support rights, lateral and subjacent support. There are easements, which I've already talked about a little bit, and there are improvements. Whatever improvements you put on the property, they stay and run with the land. They are pertinent to the land, the property. And then the covenants, the rules that are in place, the conditions and restrictions and covenants that are in place when you bought it, they run with it. When you sell it to the next person, you're selling it subject to those covenants as well. We're going to get more into that in another chapter. Here's the water rights. Here's what you need to know. Some terminology. Oh, sorry. Go back one slide. Tell me which slide you need. I'm looking. Let me find you in the... Okay, there you are. Just give me a thumbs up when I hit it. Am I there yet? Or you could just tell me. Unmute. Oh, forget it. You got it? Was it any of that stuff? Or are we okay? Okay, water rights. Depends on what kind of water we're talking about. If it's a non-tidal waterway, meaning water that does not have tides. You know, tides like the ocean. The ocean comes in closer to into the land at certain times of day, and then it goes out further away. That's the tidal movement of the ocean. There's also tides that happen on some really big lakes too, like the Great Lakes in the U.S. in the north. They're so big that they have tides, just like the ocean does. The rights associated with water that does not have tidal activity are called riparian rights. What kinds of bodies of water do not have tides? Streams and rivers and smaller lakes, normal sized lakes, all of those are non-tidal. So the rights affiliated with those kinds of bodies of water are called riparian rights. Non-tidal waters, riparian. Compare that to the tidal kinds of waters like ocean and large lakes, things that have tides. Those, if it has a tide, the rights associated with those kinds of water, bodies of water, are literal rights compared to riparian rights. Now, what's the difference? Here's riparian rights. We're talking about non-tidal bodies of water. If you can put a boat on it, navigate it, if it's navigable, then what you own when you have property that goes up to that water's edge, what you own is just up to the edge. So like Lake Norman, Lake Tillery, name a lake that I don't know anything about in Raleigh or the Triangle area, any kind of a lake where people go out skiing on, they have to be pulled by a boat, therefore it's navigable. When you own property on that size water, could be a river too, by the way, you own just to the edge. You don't get to claim ownership out into the middle of it. Nobody owns out into the middle of Lake Norman. They just own to the edge of Lake Norman. And then if it's a non-navigable body of water, meaning you can't put a boat on it, you can't drive on it, or whatever you call, I guess you drive boats, right? Streams, small rivers, small streams, things you basically could just walk out into, you own to the middle of it. If it's a non-navigable body of water, the riparian right for a non-navigable body of water is that you own all the way to the center of the water. So if your property between you and your neighbor is one border of that is a stream, that's what separates you and your neighbor, then you both own out into the center of that stream. The division point is the middle of that stream because it's non-navigable. You own to the center of it. Rivers, lakes, and streams. So think riparian rights, just think of the word river and just attach lakes and streams to it. I'm just trying to give you some ways to maybe remember this stuff. Riparian rights include navigable, can you put a boat on it, or non-navigable. And that depends on which part of it you own. Literal rights are things that have tides. And let's get our there we go. That's what we want. So you can kind of tell how far up the tide comes on this ocean, on this beach. It comes all the way up to where that sand is kind of carved away. That's the high tide mark. I need to make a loop. At another time of day, maybe approximately 12 hours later, the tide goes way out, and you could actually walk down this stretch of beach where the word literal is in this image and not get wet because the water doesn't come up that far at that time of day, right? So literal rights are about the tides. And what do you own when you have property on the beach or on water that's got tides? You own to the high tide line. That is how much you own, to wherever the tide comes in to the highest point. You can't run people off and fuss at them for walking across your property if they're walking across the beach when the tide is out and they're walking on the part that would be wet when the tide is in, right? In the news several years ago, at the time, I think it was it Mayor Chris Christie in New Jersey? Was he the mayor or the governor? I don't remember. He got in trouble, or he got in the news because he apparently ran some people off because his beach property, he said, "You're on my property, get off my property." He actually was right, because in New Jersey, it is the opposite of how it is in North Carolina. He actually does own in New Jersey all the way down to the water, no matter whether it's high or low tide. But in North Carolina, it's different. If he lived here and owned beachfront, he would only own up to the high tide line. And if somebody's walking down the beach when the tide is out, not a thing he could do about it, right? He would have been in the wrong. Some more water-related terms. If you gain extra land because the water, it's the movement of the water deposited soil and it had built up to the point where you could actually walk on it and it's not underwater, that's called accretion. The word accretion. I guess if I'm trying to remember that word, I'm going to think accretion addition, right? You're adding soil. The water, the movement of the water is adding soil. Like out here in this tropical area, looks like maybe the movement of the water has made the sand kind of build up there in the distance, and you could actually walk across it. That's accretion. Gaining land because soil is deposited by the water is called accretion. Accretion addition. I should have probably put that in the slide. I just thought of it though. This is a constantly evolving subject. Think of all kinds of things over time. What about the opposite? What about when the water goes away? If the water recedes away and you gain land because water no longer covers the land, that's called reliction. Accretion and reliction. Accretion means adding soil. The water has made the soil build up. Reliction means the water has gone away, probably because of like drought. Anybody ever driven over a bridge over water and you look on the shore and it's this, classic North Carolina red clay, like a band of red clay around the edges? That's because it was really hot that summer and the water evaporated and there was some drought, right? And so the water level lowered. And so the soil that was previously covered by the water is now no longer covered by water. When that property owner that owns to the water's edge, whoever owns to the edge and the water goes away because of drought, that's their property. The property that is uncovered by the water is officially theirs through reliction. Now, I doubt they're going to build anything on it because it'll probably get covered back up once the water builds back up and covers it up again. That's just a sort of an understood thing. Buyers, it's not necessarily a disclosure item. It's just something that happens. We're talking about what are the rights involved. And if you gain land, whether through accretion or reliction, you own that land. If you own up in that, up to that body of water. So no, that's not something that's something you necessarily have to disclose. It's just an understood thing. So those are two examples of gaining land, accretion and reliction. Now we're going to talk about losing land. And you've all seen this. You've all driven by a construction site and you've seen kind of the soil has torn away, is worn away over time gradually. This is sort of an extreme example, but erosion is gradual wearing away of land by water. Many times it's because maybe the rain comes in really heavy and there's not enough grass in that part of the property. And so the soil goes away because the water washes it away because there's not enough root system and grass to hold it in place. But that's losing land by gradual wearing away of it is erosion. You can probably predict where we're going next. If erosion is about gradual wearing away of land, what is it called when it's suddenly worn away or torn away? When land is torn away suddenly because of like a natural disaster, a hurricane or earthquake or a flood, the word for that is avulsion. So erosion and avulsion are the two types of losing land. Accretion and reliction were the two types of gaining land. Avulsion is the sudden tearing away of the land. You can see where the green has been covered up by blue down there because the hurricane brought in lots of flooding and higher waves. And so what you used to be able to walk across is now covered up by water. You've lost the land. If you owned that down there, you've lost some of the land you owned because it's now covered up by this water. Those are the water rights. Those are the terms for water rights. The next ones are support rights. There's two kinds. Either lateral support, meaning side to side. For instance, your neighbor is higher up than you are. Therefore, back when it was built, the developer put in a retaining wall. So you have this retaining wall that has to stay there. Because if it weren't there, the land would wash down. And either if you're the one up above, your yard's going to wash away, or if you're the one down below, they're coming down onto yours. So that's lateral support, where the sides of the land is supported. And you have the right for that to be there because it protects your property. And then another kind of support right is what happens when you sell or lease away those subsurface rights and people start drilling or mining for mineral oil or gas. You might have heard the term fracking. That's another, that's what we're looking at here. You can see that brown part at the bottom is the fracking zone. You've pulled resources out from underneath the ground, the earth. Well, now there's a void down there. How do we keep what's on the surface from falling into like a sinkhole because you pulled minerals or soil or minerals or oil or gas from down there? Subjacent rights. They have to put in, if they pull it from underneath, they have to keep it supported and put in subjacent support. Think subjacent, subterranean, under the ground. Support the ground to keep a sinkhole from being formed, because they've pulled stuff out from underneath your property. That's it for support rights, just lateral or subjacent. How many deeds could there be on a single property? How many deeds or titles could there be on a property? Oh, yeah, I'll go back. The property may gain. Oh, we covered that already. Yeah, good job. 3 of them. Tell me where you want to go back to. Either unmute or tell me in the chat where you would like. Be glad to. Was that this one? I'm looking at faces. Okay, I see you nodding. Good. We good? All right. Also, when a property is transferred to the new owner, you sell it to someone, what happens to the water rights that you have on it? What happens to those water rights? Do you take them with you, or do they stick with the land? Yeah, they stay with the land. They transfer to the new owner. They transfer with the land. They're pertinent to the land. Good job. All right, we learned that real property is immovable and indestructible. And that real property is the land, it's everything on it naturally, and it's also the improvements and the legal rights, the bundle of legal rights. We know that. Personal property is the other stuff. Everything else that's movable. It's the stuff that goes on the moving truck, right? Personalty is another word for personal property, just like realty is another word for real property. The word RELTY is another word. You'll like Happy Valley Realty. That's what we're in the business of. Real estate, realty, you'll see the word realty. You'll also maybe see the word personalty, and that just means the opposite of real estate. Personal property, movable property that doesn't stay with the house. No, the term to know is severance. To sever is to cut something off. And if you're severing something from a property, you're changing it from real property into personal property. So that tree up there has been changed from a real property tree that was attached to that real estate into a personal property log that can now be put on a truck and driven away. It was severed from the real property. Changing from real to personal, that's all we're talking about. Severance. The word severance. And then down below is the crops, whether it's picking apples or harvesting corn. They're severing the crops from the earth. That's why crops are considered personal property, because they're going to be harvested. If the crop is still ripening when you go under contract, what happens? It is severed from the sale of the property and can be cultivated even after closing, because it still has to grow, still in the process of growing when you sell. Severance, cutting off. Annexation is adding to. So, annexation would be an example of putting something from the status of personal property to the status of real property. You bought that little marigold from Lowe's, you drove it home and you planted it in the flower bed. Now you've turned it into real property. It was personal property. Now it's real property. Changing personal property to real property is called annexation. And then all of that comes back around to this very crucial word in the business, even in the day-to-day of the business, fixtures. The process of attaching personal property into real property is annexation. The process of doing it is annexation. What the item is called is a fixture. You have turned it into a fixture. It has become a fixture. Affixed to the real property, therefore it's supposed to stay with it. When you sell, fixtures have to stay with the house unless everybody agrees otherwise. If you want to keep that fixture, that chandelier or those solar panels or the light fixture or those shutters, window shutters, if you want to keep them and take them with you when you sell, you better make sure the buyer knows this and that they've signed the contract that has it spelled out. So everybody's on the same page and understands that normally this fixture would stay, but this time it's going to go. And that's okay, as long as everybody knows. It's when they didn't know and they have a nasty surprise because there's big holes in the wall because that thing that was supposed to stay got removed and they didn't know that was going to happen. Kitchen cabinets, another example of fixtures, right? Light fixtures, obviously. The plumbing system, sinks and toilets and tubs and pipes. I've seen all kinds of things when back in 2008, when people were mad because they got foreclosed or sad and they had to move out. I've seen where they took every bit of the kitchen cabinetry out of the house and the kitchen had nothing in it, just pipes poking up out of the floor. They stole, right? That was illegal. They stole fixtures that should have remained with the house. Even a light bulb is officially a fixture because you screw it in. If it's something you can just lift off of a hook on the wall, that's personal property. But if you have to unscrew it with an item or even just a light bulb, that's a fixture. How do we figure out what fixtures are? It's this acronym. Another one, second acronym, IRMA. This is what's called the Total Circumstances Test. The acronym IRMA stands for the intention, the relationship, the method of annexation, and the adaptation to the real estate. Let's look at what those mean. If there's a dispute between parties that somebody took something that maybe they shouldn't have, and it goes to court, they get sued, the judge is going to say, okay, let's look at the total circumstances test and determine if it, first of all, is a fixture that should have remained with the real property. So it's a legal test by the court system to determine if it's fixture or real or personal. Real or personal, fixture or not. It requires all four of these components to IRMA, but the major one that has to pass the test to determine if it was a fixture is the intention of the one who installed it. Was it intended originally to be a fixture or not? So intention is the most important of all four of them. And so the idea here is, would a reasonable person have intended for this thing to be a fixture? A classic one that comes to mind is like a big fancy chandelier, like a foyer, 2-story foyer, and the chandelier light fixture way up there, 20 feet in the air. Odds are someone who put that in didn't expect to take it with them when they left. So if they don't make any other provision otherwise in the contract, a judge would probably say, pretty sure your intention when you put that in there was to leave it and let it just be there, right? But that's part of the process. The court would look at the intention and decide, would a reasonable person have intended? I know you're saying that you meant to take it now, but that's just because you're mad, maybe because the buyer did something else that you're ticked about, and you're like, well, I'll show them. That buyer dared to ask me to fix a whole bunch of stuff, and I had to do it or else they were going to walk away, and I just couldn't afford to let them walk away, so I had to go ahead and sell it to them, and I had to fix it and spend $5,000 fixing this ridiculous list of repairs that they gave me, well, I'll show them. I'll just take my $3,000 chandelier with me. Okay. Is it in the contract? No. Then it's a fixture. Leave that chandelier alone, right? They might take you to court. They might sue you over this. Did you intend originally when you put that chandelier in for it to stay with the house? Probably, right? The next word in IRMA is relationship. What is the relationship of the person who did the attaching? Are they an owner or a renter? Anybody ever rent a place and you hang shelves on the wall? You probably planned to take them with you when you left. And it's probably spelled out in the lease that you could do that too. But if it came to some sort of a dispute, more likely that an owner is attaching something and fully intends it to stay there and remain with the property than a tenant. If a tenant's attaching something, if all you are is a renter, you're probably not going to lose that thing you screwed into the wall because you're a renter and you're the one who put it there. You probably want to take it with you when you leave. The owner usually intends for things to be permanent. In other words, the greater or stronger the legal relationship, the more likely it's going to be that that item is considered a fixture. Does that make sense? And then the M, need to do a little housekeeping here, is the method of how it's attached. How permanently was it attached? How permanent is it? Could it be removed without damage? And was the space around the item highly customized or not? Some real fancy kitchens have a Sub-Zero refrigerator, right? And you don't just pull those away from the wall and walk out the door with them. They are screwed into the cabinetry. And even the more current thing in the higher priced properties is that you can't even tell it's a refrigerator because it has cabinet doors attached to it. That is truly built in, probably a fixture. Going to be hard to get a judge to agree to let you take that with you if it's not written in a contract that you can take it with you because it's built in. The customization of the space around it looks like it was intended to be there forever, right? So method of annexation, how permanently was it attached? And then finally, adaptation to the real estate. Was it customized? Was it a custom feature that was built in? And was the property tailored to work together with the item itself? Maybe like a built-in outdoor kitchen with a grill that's all built in amongst the stonework and the countertop. Nice stone counter out there in the outdoor kitchen. Was it adapted to the real estate because it's all nice and smooth and one kind of looks like one big piece? Here's a big one that gets people in trouble. The size. I wish I had a picture of it close by, but my dad lived and worked on a property on Rocky River Road down in Charlotte for 50 years. And a guy bought the lot next door and built this house, built it himself. It took him forever. And so my dad even helped him a little bit. This guy, the house ended up kind of looking like a funeral home. He made some interesting choices and it just it's a big ranch, monster house, too big for the lot. He put this 7 or 8 foot tall fountain in the front yard that looks kind of like this one, much bigger than most residential fountains might be. It kind of looks like it should be in front of a bank in downtown Charlotte or something. Doesn't matter how big the item is. That has nothing to do with whether it's going to be considered a fixture or not. So the size of it, the value of it, it could be a $2,000 fountain. It could be 8 feet tall and weigh 2,000 pounds. And where is it located? None of that matters. What it all matters comes back around to is the IRMA total circumstances test. In other words, that fountain could just be sitting on top of the ground and not actually attached to the ground. If you had a forklift, you could lift it off of the pad that it's on. But maybe it's bolted down to the pad. Now we're talking about a fixture, right? It could be sitting there or it could be bolted down. One is a fixture. One is still personal property. Even though it looks like a fixture, it may not be. The overarching theme here is ask questions. When you're a broker in the business, find out, hey, is that fountain screwed in, bolted down, attached? And by the way, did you want to take it with you, Mrs. Seller? Oh, yeah, that's a family heirloom. I'm taking that with me. It is bolted down, but I'm taking it with me. Okay, fine, no problem. It's officially considered a fixture right now, but if you want to take it with you, we'll just disclose to everyone that this fountain does not remain with the house. And then when people make offers on your property, we're going to make sure that when we have a final contract signed by everybody, it specifically says owner takes fountain with her or something to that effect. That's what we're talking about. Just clarity, transparency. So size, value, and location is irrelevant. What they could do to you on the test is go into this long paragraph explanation of, and it's time for another break, of this item, but don't let them distract you with how big or how expensive it is. Focus back on IRMA and what you know a fixture is versus personal property. I know what a break is. May not be good at giving them to you right away. I'm going to set an alarm for next time. So let's come back in 10.
big, 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 very big, 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 very big.
Every time I come a nigga gotta set it, then I gotta go, and then I gotta get it, then I gotta blow, and then I gotta shut it. Any little thing a nigga think that he be doing, cause it doesn't matter, cause I'm gonna
Who the fuck is Who the fuck is this, bro? Hey, bro, hey, show who is it, bro? Hey, bro, see what he want, bro. Hey, phone, what's up, bro?
Cause y'all know this private property, right?
Oh, bro, I own this bitch.
So yeah, roll the window down, bro.
Hey, bro. Roll the window down some more, bro.
Nah, bro, I can't do that shit.
Hey, bro. Hey, roll the window down some more, bro.
Plays, all right?
We gotta run the ball. Six down.
Let me pass, block. We'll run the ball.
Can we run it down there?
Just play
We
center.
run it down
Yeah,
there.
Jeff,
Okay, so
we will. All right, when we call pass plays, block. He's calling plays. Go sit down. He's calling plays. I will sit down. Y'all quit yelling. Hey, go sit down. No, we're cool. Y'all quit yelling. Over here telling us how to block. He's doing it. Come on, okay. He's yelling at us. You don't have to go yet. No. I'm mic'd up, too. I'm mic'd up. Hey, quit calling the plays, all right?
We gotta run the ball. Six down.
Let me pass, block.
So I cheated, right? But I didn't suck dick. I know I cheated. Is that like fully cheated? Like
Did you fuck?
I fucked, but I didn't suck his dick.
Oh, then
Welcome back. Let's bring it on back together and finish up talking about fixtures. It really just comes back to this. Put it in the contract. That's what the Real Estate Commission says. To avoid confrontation, make sure it's clear. Make sure everybody knows what's expected, what's going. If it's a fixture, that's okay. You want to take it with you, tell them. And make sure that they understand, the buyer understands that the price they are offering is going to not include what would normally be included, right? That might affect what they want to pay for it. So we have a specific place in the contract and in the listing agreement, by the way, that says, here are fixtures and here's the personal property. Do you want to take some fixtures with you, seller? Then write it in this space. Do you want to leave behind some personal property? Any ideas, by the way, what kinds of personal property maybe a seller might want to leave behind to get away from this idea of fixtures? Yeah. Furniture, they might want to leave some furniture behind. Sure. What about the most common personal property that might stay with a house? Yeah, the stove, the range. What else? And you might not be answering this one because you might think that it is always included, but a refrigerator is personal property. The refrigerator is not a fixture unless it's screwed in. Even though it's heavy, again, doesn't matter if it's heavy. That doesn't mean whether it's a fixture. Refrigerator is considered personal property. Washer and dryer are considered personal property too. Yeah. Okay, like any good rule, there are exceptions. Yeah, that's interesting, Fernanda, about the TV mount. Since it is screwed in, bolted into the wall, it is considered a fixture. Now, I just told you about IRMA, and that is what you need to know for this class and this test. But in the real world, there's actually a bulleted list of about 24 items that are in the standard contract we use that are considered fixtures. Some of them don't necessarily fall under the IRMA definition. I don't want to get into it much because I don't want to confuse you for the test, but some of them are clearly, according to IRMA, personal property, but because there's such a common point of frustration and confusion, we've added them, the commission has added them and said these are going to be considered fixtures from here forward. So a TV mount, the mount itself is considered a fixture, but the TV itself is not included in that list for our purposes. But if we were to go by IRMA, we would ask questions like, is the TV just hooked over the mount? Could you just lift it off and unplug it? Then it's officially not a fixture. But if you could have to screw it in, then the definition of a fixture is something that's attached to. So that would make a TV a fixture, but it just so happens that it's in the bullet point list that the only thing that is a fixture is the mount. Yeah, blinds are screwed into the wall, so they're considered fixtures as well. The window treatments themselves, like curtains, they are not fixtures according to that list, but the hardware and the curtain rods are considered fixtures. So there's little nuances there in the real world of real estate. But again, I don't want to mess you up for the test. Here are the exceptions that are testable for you. If it is a commercial property and that tenant who's renting the commercial property, like a hair salon in this picture, when that person put that hair salon in and installed those sink stations, those sinks aren't just freely sitting on top of the ground, right? They are plumbed in. You can't just walk out the door with them. Therefore, if they were in a house, they would be considered a fixture that stays with that real property. But when it's commercial, they are considered a trade fixture. They belong to the tenant, and the tenant gets to take them with them when they leave. A trade fixture is not real property. That's what we're getting around to. Trade fixtures are needed for the use in that business. It could be a kitchen, like a bar and grill, and they need like their griddle, their ovens, all of that stuff probably belongs to the tenant. And when that tenant no longer needs that space and doesn't lease the space anymore, they're going to take that stuff out and go take it with them because it's not a fixture. It is a trade fixture. And trade fixtures are personal property, not real property. Trade fixtures are personal property. I need to write that in this slide a little more obviously. And then another item when it comes to like farmland are agricultural fixtures. They're different. They're the opposite. Agricultural fixtures are not owned by the tenant who's renting that farmland. They're attached to that rented property. They're used in the business of the agriculture, and the tenant may not remove agricultural fixtures. They are real property. So agricultural fixtures are real property and trade fixtures are personal property. But they're both screwed in, attached to the real estate, but they're not normal fixtures, right? Trade fixtures are personal. Agriculture are still real. The tenant is using them, but they stay with the real property. Okay, when could it look like a fixture but not really be a fixture? When you haven't finished paying for it yet. Anybody ever walk through Lowe's or Home Depot and they say, you could have this $20,000 kitchen for easy payments for the next 5 years if you pay $700 a month? I don't know. We will finance this nice new matching kitchen appliance set. You don't have to have the white stove with the black refrigerator and the stainless steel oven anymore. It can all match and be nice and new. Okay, great. Let me fill out the credit card statement, the credit application. Fine, whatever. Now we're dealing with uniform commercial code. And because this fixture that normally would be considered built in, like this refrigerator and this oven and this range, this wall oven, this is a North Carolina thing, by the way. Because you haven't paid for it yet, you're making monthly payments. It is considered personal property, not actually a fixture. So what's going to happen is when you sell your property and you haven't finished paying for these things yet, the closing attorney is going to do a title search and they're going to uncover and find out, oh, they don't own these appliances that are normally fixtures. And so they're going to find out what is the balance you owe them, whoever it is you're making payments to. You're going to have to pay that out of your proceeds in order to close on the property. But in and of itself, a financed fixture is not a fixture. It is not real property. It is personal property until you've paid it off. That could show up on the test. That could be something you see. If it's financed, it is personal property, even if it's screwed in to the cabinets, to the walls, and normally would be considered a fixture. Okay, couple more terms to know. More formatting issues. Sorry about that. The term improved land versus an improved lot. Improved land means there's a structure on it, at least one. Improved land, something. House, barn, building, something. That's improved land. An improved lot means that there are basic utility services available. Power, water, sewer, street access. So the difference between an improved land and an improved lot. Have you ever driven through an area and you see these white pipes and maybe red and blue pipes poking up the neighborhood to be in its infancy? All of those lots are improved lots. They have utilities running to them. Pop quiz. It's always easy to tell what a fixture is, true or false. Always easy. By the way, testable, test-taking tip, words like always and never almost always mean that's not the right answer. So absolutes are usually a sign that, yeah, this is an easy one to mark out. There are very few. There are some, but usually when it's an always or a never thing, just think in your head, let me look a little closer here, because few things are always or never. Okay. Manufactured homes or mobile homes. The kind that came in by being pulled by a truck, right? They're built off-site. They're built in probably a temperature-controlled environment in a warehouse. They're probably pretty decently built, especially nowadays. And you might have a single wide, you might have a double wide, you might even have a triple wide where they bring in 3 of these and put them together, and it kind of almost looks like a stick-built house. The new ones, they've done even a better job than ever. The old ones from the 60s, 70s, 80s, you could tell from the weird kind of slope ceilings, and it's pretty obvious that it's a mobile home or a manufactured home. But today they've done a really good job of building it in a way that you can't really tell all the time. When you run across one, whether it's new or old, there are specific steps required to turn this manufactured home into real property, because it starts its life out being personal property. It even arrives to your lot, your land that you're putting it on. It's personal property at first because it got pulled behind a truck. Now you've parked it. Now it still has a hitch. That's what those red circles are. The hitch in the front and the wheels there in the back. The hitch is still there. The wheels are still there. It's not on a foundation. It's just sitting there like a car. This is not personal property yet. It is still real. I'm sorry. This is not real property yet. It is still personal property. So what does it take to convert a mobile home from personal property into real property? You've got to take off the hitch, and you have to take off the wheels and axle so that it's not movable anymore. You want to make it not portable, because that's what real property is. It's immovable. So let's make this mobile home immovable. Take off the hitch, take off the wheels, take off the axle. And then the third thing up there at the top right is tell the DMV that it is now real property. That's the big one. You've got to file an affidavit with the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, and say, hey, this is no longer a vehicle. It was, because it drove across the road. You guys cared back then because it needed to be safe to drive across the road. But now it's not going to be on the road anymore. It is sitting still. We've taken off the wheels and the hitch. And in addition to all that, I don't think I have a picture of it, but you would also put it on a foundation, like a brick foundation, and tie it down to the ground. So like if a hurricane came through, it can't just lift it because it's bolted and strapped down to the foundation and to the earth. So the foundation thing, all of this is going to be required for a bank to want to finance it, because a bank's not going to finance a mobile home until you make it immobile, right? So it's take off the hitch and the wheels and attach it to a permanent foundation, and then register it with the DMV, acknowledging that you did the first 2 things. Now it can be considered real property. So what do you do as a broker when you go to list a house and you find out, oh, it's the house, but it's also this old mobile home on the back of the property? What are you going to do when you're sitting there across the table from this seller and you find out not just the house, but there's that old mobile home over there too? What kind of questions are you going to ask? Yeah, got it. Fernanda gets right to the point. Make sure it's real property. Start asking them, and maybe it's not. Maybe they just rolled it in there and started living. They hooked some water and power to it, and it still has the hitch, still has the wheels. I once had a closing that was delayed 2 months because the buyer for my listing was going to refinance his mobile home that he currently lived in order to get the down payment money. He's going to basically pull his equity out. Don't worry about what that means. So he had to, turns out his mobile home that he lived in all this time had never been converted to real property. He still had to take the wheels off. He still had to register it with the DMV, and all of that just took extra time. And my sellers were just mad. They were family friends, my sellers, and they're kind of rough, rugged kind of people from my childhood. And they lit me up. They weren't mad at me, but I was the scapegoat. So I had to call and give them the news about the 4th delay in a row, and they were just, my ears were bleeding. My poor wife, fiance at the time, she was in the car. We were at the gym, and I did this sort of as a speakerphone call real quick just to give them the news. And she said, please never let me be a part of this conversation ever again. She is not a confrontational person, and it was not something she enjoyed. Me either, but I had to do it. So this sort of thing can really add time to the process. You want to find out, oh, that mobile home, where does it stand in the mix here? Is it real property or is it not? Now, it may not be a mobile home. It may be something called a modular home. Anybody have an idea of what the difference is? Mobile versus modular, or manufactured versus modular. They were both built somewhere else. They're not stick built on the property. They both came in on a trailer. The manufactured home is the trailer. The modular home came in large pieces on a tractor trailer, right? Probably in at least 2 or 3 or 4 big already assembled parts. So when it arrives, you can see it's like a factory built to state building code situation. It's a enclosed. Case could be made that a modular home is better built than a stick-built home on site because it's built in a nice atmosphere controlled environment, assembly line kind of thing. It's governed by a general statute of North Carolina. Then it comes out on the backs of trucks and they hook it up and set it in place. So the big difference between a mobile home and a modular home is this question: when does it become real property? We just learned when a mobile home or a manufactured home becomes real property. Takes those 3 steps: remove stuff that was making it mobile, put it on a foundation, and register it with the DMV. The only thing you have to do to make a modular home be considered real property is put it on the foundation. The DMV is not involved because it in and of itself was never a trailer. It didn't have its own wheels. It sat on the back of a truck or tractor trailer, right? So here's kind of what it looks like when it arrives. They literally pull those pieces off of the trailer and they stick it on that foundation and stick them together, fasten them together. The roof was already there. They just kind of pulled it up into place. Of course, there's all kinds of different sizes and shapes and manner of building. They still have to do some pieces, but for the most part, this is way faster than a stick-built home, right? So this is the idea of a modular home. You have this 2-story home, and you could go through this thing after the fact and never have a clue that it came in 4 pieces on the back of a semi-truck. So what should you ask if you see a mobile home on the property? Oops, let me get to this. There it is. Is it real or is it personal? And the big difference for the test, difference between manufactured and mobile is what does it take to make it real property? The only thing to make modular real property is installing it on the foundation. All right. Next topic. The one that you loved to read about in your material. We're not talking about big fancy estates. The word estates here just means how you own something, your ownership in it, not the size of the thing. It's not because it's a mansion that it's called an estate. It's the way you own it. And it might be that you own it in a way that lets you do whatever you want with it. Or it might be that you own it in a way that you have to do certain things with it, or you're not allowed to do other things with it. So estates in real property. When we see the word estate, we just mean the degree, quantity, and extent of interest in the property. It includes your rights in it today and the rights in it in the future. And it's a description of the rights themselves. We're talking about the rights you have when you own that property, not the property itself. We're talking about estates in real property. It's the rights you have in it, not the property itself. One second here. This is driving me crazy. There we go. Okay. There we are. We're back. All right. 2 types of estates. Are we owning it or are we renting it? That's the difference. Those are the 2 major types of estates. Estates of ownership versus estates of non-ownership. And the words are these. If it's something you own, then it is a freehold estate. Freehold. You're free to hold it as you wish. Maybe is a way that you could think of it. Freehold means you're buying it. You own it. Non-freehold means you don't own it, you're just renting it. Another word for non-freehold is leasehold. That's a pretty easy one. Not too far of a leap to make there. So freehold versus non-freehold are the two major types of estates. Here's a chart that I find helpful, and we're going to kind of dig into this chart. We're going to get into the non-freehold estates later at a different chapter, the rental, the whole property management, landlord and tenant arrangement. We're not going to talk about this now. Just to let you know, there is leasehold or non-freehold, but we're done with that for now. We're going to dig more into the freehold left-hand side here, and that's what these are. These are all of the types of freehold estates. Two main types. Can you leave it to your heirs or not? So if you can leave it to your heirs, it's called inheritable. It can be inherited. If you can't leave it to your heirs, then brilliant. It is non-inheritable, right? Not able to be inherited by your children, your heirs, whoever they may be. You'll notice that there are only two types of freehold estate that are not inheritable. I'm trying to think. Normally let me just go with that. Let's talk about those first. Ignore their left side. Let's look at the non-inheritable kind. Okay. First of all, marital life estate. What we're talking about with marital life estate is this. You can kind of see that I've left it highlighted there on the far right. A marital life estate just means that if you're married, maybe your spouse is mad at you and then they die and they try to cut you out of the will altogether or leave you like next to nothing. They can't get away with that if you're married to them. The marital life estate says a spouse cannot cut the other one out. It says if there is no will at all, or if they try to cut the spouse out, not going to happen. There is a chart that you do not need to know for this test, but if you're curious, you could Google it. North Carolina marital life estate chart. And that chart says for the amount of years you were married to this person, that there's a certain percentage of ownership of their estate that you are entitled to. They can't cut you out below that certain level, right? So the surviving spouse has a certain percentage that they are entitled to based on how long they were married. You don't need to know what it is past that. There's just a thing out there that dictates these things. If you were to run across this as a broker in real life, you would certainly not even go into it. You'd say, hey, let's get you connected to an attorney. Find out what's going on. I can't give you advice on this, but this is a thing. Don't worry if you're upset that the person died, obviously, but that you found out they tried to cut you out of everything. They can't. If you're still married, unless you're divorced, right? Still married, there's a certain bare minimum that you are entitled to. So, in other words, last bullet point here, spouses have rights even if the spouse themselves are not listed on the title to the property, also known as the deed, right? So that's a marital life estate. I like to get that one out of the way because it's sort of off to the side there. It's one of the non-inheritable types of freehold estate. The other one is the conventional life estate. Okay, this one's going to take a little effort here. Conventional life estate. This is the idea that you could buy or be given a piece of property and you get to own it only as long as you are alive. That's the gist of this. A conventional life estate says you get to have this property for as long as you're alive. Once you die, if your kids are excited that they're going to inherit that property, they're going to become quite sad and disappointed because it's not yours to give to them. It is non-inheritable. A conventional life estate is only good for the duration of the lifespan of the one who owns it. You don't own it in such a complete way that you get to tell what happens to it once you're dead. That's a different kind that we'll talk about in a minute. A conventional life estate says that the one who owns this life estate only owns it while they are alive. You can't leave it to your kids. That's why it's called non-inheritable. So, not inheritable since we have some terms here. When we're dealing with a life estate, there's two kinds of life estates. We're going to see the one that is inheritable in a minute, but this one is a conventional life estate. The person who is owning the property is called the life tenant. Try not to let it be confusing that the word tenant has to do with leasing. We're not talking about leasing or renting here. It just so happens just to be the term. It's just the terminology. So the life tenant is the one who owns it. It what? Not the property itself, the estate in the property, right? The conventional life estate. The fact that they have the ownership of it, but only while they are alive. The one who owns it is the life tenant. And in this case, the lifespan that it depends on is the same person. That's the measuring life. The life that's being measured. Once they're dead, they no longer own it. It's not an estate, not their estate that they can give to anybody else. So if you own a conventional life estate in a property, then you have access and use of it as long as you're alive. You can do things with it that you can do with any other property you might own in all the other ways. As long as, for instance, could you sell it? Can you sell your conventional life estate? Can you sell a property that you own as a conventional life estate? You only own it as long as you're alive. Could you sell it to someone else? You actually could, as long as the person you sell it to understands that they're not going to own it anymore once you die. Yeah, I know. I love it when I see that. It's like, what? That sucks. That's terrible. Well, yeah. So therefore, you probably would sell it to them at probably not a market price. It's going to be a deep discount, right? If you even could find somebody willing to buy it and pay you for something that, if somebody came to me and said, you want to buy my property here? I own it as a conventional life estate. I would say, forget HIPAA laws. What's your medical record look like? How healthy are you? Let me drive you to work every day. Let me make sure you're okay. And we're going to get you off of those cigarettes too, by the way. We're going to try to extend my ownership that I'm buying from you because it depends on your lifespan. You are the measuring life, right? So a conventional life estate, some terms. The life tenant is the one who owns that conventional life estate. The measuring life is the lifespan it depends upon. The lifespan during which you own it. The reason that's two different things is because they are two different people in another kind of estate we're going to see in a minute. So life tenant and measuring life happen to be the same person when it's a conventional life estate. It is your lifespan if you're the one who owns this thing in this way. Therefore, you can't leave it to your heirs. It's not inheritable. So let's see, life tenant's the buyer, the one who gets it. Measuring life is the one on whose lifespan the ownership depends. When that measuring life dies, what happens to the property depends on the one they bought it from. We know that it doesn't go to their heirs. It's not inheritable, but where does it go? It's got to go somewhere. It is not for that person who is the life tenant and the measuring life. It is not up to them as to what happens to it when they die. It depends on the seller they bought it from and what they determined way back when they sold it to this person. If that seller decided, look, I will sell you this farm. Here's a good example. You've got farmland, 100 acres, and it's an old guy who owns 100 acres next door to a young guy who owns another, let's say 50 acres. The old guy has no kids. He's just alone, but never Gregor. I've never actually dealt with this in real life. He said, how many times have you dealt with this? There are different variations that this could come up, but let's think about this example. Old farmer, young farmer, next door neighbors, 100 acres versus 50. The old farmer says, look, you've been great. You've been like a son to me. You're up and coming. You're 28. You're going to probably be farming for a long time. Let me go ahead and sell you. I'm going to retire. Let me sell you my 100 acres as a conventional life estate. So that young farmer, what are they getting? They're getting that 100 acres from that old man, and they get to use it and farm it. They've now tripled their farmable land, and they're 28. And if they're going to fast forward and not die till they're 86, that's a heck of it. Depends on the price, I guess, but that's a pretty good deal. They're young, they're healthy, they're going to be able to use a lot more and grow a lot more crops. But the kids that they have along the way over those 50 years or whatever, they may be under the mistaken impression that, oh, great, when dad dies, we're going to have 150 acres. No, you're not. You're going to have the original 50. That 100 of them he got as a conventional life estate from the neighbor. All he got was the ability to use it all these years, because when dad dies, it's gone. So the old dude that he got it from, that he bought it from, or that he was given it from, that old dude, when he gave it to him, he said to him, look, I will sell you this, or I'll give you this conventional life estate for these 100 acres. But when you die, I don't have any kids. I don't have any family, but I'm real passionate about the Boys and Girls Club of North Carolina. I want it. It's going to revert. It's going to not revert. It's going to be the remainderman I'm going to put in place is the Boys and Girls Club, or name a charity, right? Or some other person. It could be just a complete different third party. That is called a remainderman. When the seller of this conventional life estate decides that the property is going to go to another party once the measuring life dies, then that person is called, or person or entity or charity is called a remainderman. Or it might be that the old farmer says, you know what? I do have a couple of kids. They're just not nice to me, but I've got some grandkids that are okay. But for the immediate future, I'm going to go ahead and sell you this, and you're going to own this as a conventional life estate. Whenever you're done with it, meaning you're dead, it's not going to go to your heirs. It's going to revert back to my estate. It's going to revert back, and then my grandkids can have it. So it's two options as to what happens when that measuring life dies. It's either going to go to a remainderman, third party, or it's going to revert back to the seller. Make sense? All right. Now, that is a conventional life estate. Now let's go back and look at the chart. We just covered both of the non-inheritable types of freehold estates. Now let's look at the other kind of life estate. There's a conventional life estate, and there's one other one. There's this one called an estate for the life of another. The French term is an estate pour haute vie. I don't know how to speak French. I've been told that's how you're supposed to say it. If I had not heard that from a French teacher, I would have just said estate pour autre vie. Who cares? But we're talking about a different person. The measuring life and the life tenant are two different people when it's an estate for the life of another. It's in the name. An estate not for your life, but for the life of another. That's why it's inheritable. Because let's look at it closer. An estate for the life of another. The life estate is inheritable. You can leave it to your heirs. So now let's change things up a little bit. Old farmer, sells it to the young farmer, but not as a conventional life estate. He sells it to the young farmer as an estate for the life of another. He says, look, I've got a special needs kid, and he lives in my house still on the farm, and he likes to walk through the woods and stuff. And I don't want to take that from him, but I'm retiring and I'm going to move to a condo. He can get along okay by himself. He's grown, but I'm going to sell you this as an estate for the life of another. You get to use this life estate, and you are the life tenant Mr. 28-year-old younger farmer neighbor, but it's for the life of another. That other person is my special needs kid who lives in a cabin off to the side on the same property. It doesn't matter where he lives, actually. It's separate third party, other person measuring life. So the estate is only going to be good for as long as that special needs person is still alive. You with me? The life of another, not the same as the life tenant. So if the special needs child or grown child is still alive, then the life tenant 28-year-old neighbor still gets to use and own the property. What if the 28-year-old farmer guy, though, falls off the combine and dies? He's dead. But he's not the measuring life. So that's what makes an estate for the life of another inheritable. If the life tenant dies, then what's going to happen to the property and his estate ownership in it? It's going to pass to his heirs. That's why it's inheritable. The measuring life person's still alive. The life tenant person died. Now it can be inherited. And so the people that inherited it are like, oh man, dad died, terrible, sad day. Well, we have this property now, but do we? We only have it as long as this other person over here is alive. You with me? The measuring life and the life tenant are two different people in this event. It's still the case as, okay, when the measuring life does finally die, now something's going to happen to this property. Where's it going to go? Depends on what the seller set up back in the beginning. Did they decide for it to revert back to their estate or themselves if they're still around? Or did they decide for it to go to a third party? Charity, business, other person, could be any of that. So the terms are all the same terms. The only difference is the measuring life the same person as the life tenant? That's the difference between a conventional life estate and an estate for the life of another. It can be confusing. What can someone do with a life estate? They could mortgage it, conceivably, as long as the bank that they mortgaged it with is okay, understanding that they might not own the property forever. They're only going to own it as long as the measuring life is alive. Good luck. I don't know if you can even find one, but legally it's allowed as long as you disclose. They could rent it out as long as that tenant knows that, look, the person that I'm renting this from dies and I don't get to rent this place anymore. Right? You can do most of the same stuff you can do when you own it free and clear outright in another kind of estate called fee simple absolute. But there are limitations. And you just need to tell the person to whom you're selling it, renting it, borrowing money against it from, what your type of ownership in it is. Okay, that's 3 of them out of the way. Now let's go over to the far left, inheritable. The best kind of ownership of all this whole page. All of these, the best possible kind for the buyer, a new owner, is fee simple absolute. Don't worry about the fee simple part and as far as what it means. It kind of comes back from like the medieval times. But basically, look, this is my property. I own it. And here's what I can do with it. Fee simple absolute means you have absolute control and power over what you can do with it. You can sell it. You can rent it. You can mortgage against it. You can leave it to your heirs. You own it completely. So that one's pretty simple. Let's make sure I hit all the highlights there. Highest form of ownership, the best possible way to own. There's no limitations to fee simple absolute. There's no conditions to your ownership with fee simple absolute. And that leaves this one. Oh boy. Okay, here we go. Fee simple defeasible. You know what? Before we launch into this, I'm going to take a on-time break this time. Let's come back in 10. Then we'll get into fee simple defeasible.
feeling very upset with myself. Yesterday, I was like, oh, actually not yesterday, actually for a while, quite frankly, to where I'm like, I'm not producing enough content on a regular basis. And so I just made the commitment to start to do it. I was like, you know what, I'm going to start producing content on a much more regular basis. And so I'm telling all of you right now that I'm going to be doing it much more often because I'm not doing it enough. And I know teeth, brush my hair, put my makeup on. So every single day I'm going to be doing a small excerpt in there wrong, from my book. I'm reading just like a quick little paragraph and then talking about it for under 2 minutes at what has happened. So you feel successful. If I do it, oh my gosh, docs, the other in there wrong. I'm going to start doing things and you do it and I'm not keeping to my commitment to do more content. Number 2,
welcome back. Okay, we've talked about non-inheritable and 2 of the 3 inheritable types of freehold estates. Let's talk about the hardest one. This is the one I think that gives people the most trouble, because I wish I could go back through this whole thing and rename some of these. I really depend upon, for memory aids, what things start with. And I think part of this problem is that we've got fee simple, defeasible, determinable. And it's like, what? Just give me easy words. Okay, so the type of inheritable life estate that we're going to talk about now is called fee simple, defeasible. When you see that word, defeasible, I want you to think of the word defeatable. Defeatable. Because a fee simple, defeasible type of estate can be defeated. You could own this and lose it if you do it wrong. If you either stop using it in the way you're supposed to keep using it, or if you use it in a way that you're not allowed to use it. So fee simple, defeasible. It's defeatable. You could lose your ownership because you didn't keep up your end of the deal or the bargain. You were not allowed to use it in a certain way, or either you had to use it in a certain way and you broke those rules. The seller imposed some sort of a limitation. And with fee simple, defeasible, determinable, there's two options here. You see, under fee simple, defeasible, there's 2 types of it. There's one that's called determinable, and there's one called condition subsequent, or subject to a condition subsequent. So let's look at the left one, the determinable one. Fee simple, defeasible, determinable means that the buyer has to keep using the property in a certain way, in the way that the sellers told them they had to use it. That seller might have said, look, there's a little church on this property, and you've got to always use it for the church. I'm going to sell it to you, fee simple, defeasible, determinable. And part of the requirement there is you can't tear the church down in order to build a strip club, or anything else for that matter. It must always be used for a church. See what I'm saying? So must keep using it for a church, or whatever the thing is, right? Must continue to use the property in a certain way. That's what determinable means. Must keep using it in a certain way. The other one means you must not use it in a certain way. That is fee simple, defeasible, subject to a condition subsequent. I know it's kind of getting ridiculous, but hang in there. The seller has imposed a limitation. They're saying you, the buyer, must never use the property in a certain way. The difference between this and determinable is determinable meant that you have to keep using it in a certain way. Subject to a condition subsequent says you must never use it in a certain way. The best example I can come up with is, yes, you can buy this acreage from me in the middle of downtown, but don't ever put a business that sells alcohol on it. I never want it to be used for selling alcohol. So no bars can be built. If you use it to do that, then you're going to lose it. You don't own it anymore. So that's it. That's fee simple, defeasible. It's either determinable, meaning you have to keep using it in a certain way, or it's subject to a condition subsequent, meaning you must never use it in a certain way. For back to the life estate. Well, let's finish with defeasible first. If the condition that you violated under fee simple, defeasible, if it's the determinable one and you violate it, you do not keep using it in a certain way as you're supposed to, then the reversion back to the seller happens automatically. Don't ask me how. You don't need to know for the test. It's a legal process. You're automatically losing your ownership. It's reverting back to the seller automatically. I don't know more than that. I've never dealt with it in real life. The other one, subject to a condition subsequent, the one that says you must not use it in a certain way, if you violate that and you do sell alcohol with the property or whatever the way is you're not supposed to, it's not automatically going to revert back. The seller would find out about it maybe, and if they found out about it, they would sue you over it and have to take you to court to get it back. So that's testable. What happens when the condition is violated? The determinable one automatically reverts back. The subject to one has to be pursued in court. Seller would have to take them to court, sue them to get it back. And that's the limit of what you need to know about this particular thing. If you want to take a screenshot or something of this, I'll pause for a moment. Then we'll do a little recap of the life estates, and then we're done with that. Okay, if you need me to go back, I'll be glad to. For both the conventional life estate and the pour out V, or for the life of another kind of life estate, what can the buyer or grantee do with the property? They can transfer it, they can sell it, they can mortgage it, they can rent it. They can use the wood on the property, the timber, for fuel and repairs, but they can't clear cut it. They can't take all of it off of there. That would be considered wasting the property. And since the property is not like fee simple, absolute, complete ownership, they can't mess it up just in case it does need to revert back to the seller. Maybe that's a way you could remember that little nuance. So basically in the red here, if they can find a willing party to sell it to or to do any of these things to involving the property, they can do that, but it's only going to last for as long as whoever the measuring life is alive. And that person whom they're selling it to, renting it to, whatever, engaging in a thing about this property with this person, they just need to understand that this is a limit. There's a limit on their ownership and their interest in it. On a conventional life estate, that life tenant has responsibilities. They have to make ordinary repairs. They have to maintain the property. They can't waste the property by like taking every tree down. And they have to pay the property taxes. The Latin phrase for real estate property taxes is ad valorem, which just means at value. You're taxed at the value of the property. And then also the life tenant has to pay the interest on the original owner's mortgage. Here's the things that a life tenant cannot do in a conventional life estate. They can't sell the wood or the timber. They can use it enough to make repairs and maintain it, but they can't sell it. They can't destroy the property, and they can't will the property to others. It's impossible. A conventional life estate can't be willed to their heirs because it's not inheritable, because they themselves are both life tenant and measuring life. That's a lot. It's a lot to handle for 10 till 9, but hopefully that will help a little bit. So a deed that includes a condition requiring something from the owner is called what kind of fee simple? A deed with a condition. Fee simple subject to a condition subsequent is certainly one of them, but there's also another one, because both it and determinable are things that could have a condition, right? Requiring something of the owner is both kinds of defeasible, fee simple, defeasible, both the determinable and the subject to a condition require something of the owner. Okay, we have a sample question here. If Michael agrees to buy a property from Dwight, during the title search, the attorney, also known as the settlement agent, sees that Michael is limited to only using the property as a farm. What type of freehold estate does Michael have? I'm giving you the answer here. But here's how the test could show up. Fee simple, determinable, detectable, discoverable, defeasible. Oh boy. All kinds of D words here. Detectable is nonsense. Pulled that from air. Discoverable is the same. Nonsense. We didn't run into that. But determinable and defeasible, okay, it's one or the other, because those are the two things we studied. So Michael's limited to only using it as a farm. He has to use it as a farm. Fee simple, defeasible, determinable. So this is, it's, if determinable weren't an option in the answer choices, then defeasible would be the best choice, right? So the overarching theme when you're answering these questions on the test is, what is the best answer? And since determinable is more of a close answer to what the question is, Michael's limited to only using it in a certain way. Yeah, that is a type of defeasible, but it more specifically is a type of determinable, right? So always look for the best answer. Chandler agreed to purchase a property from Phoebe. The closing attorney discovered that Chandler could never use the property as a business serving alcohol. What type of estate? Oops, did I add an extra name here? Does he have? If he can never use it, it's as fee simple, defeasible, subject to a condition subsequent. They've left out some words here. Fee simple, condition subsequent is what we're looking for here, because he can never use it in a certain way. Stop spoiling the answers here. Don't look. Okay. I know that none of you looked. I have no doubt. Stanley goes under contract to purchase a property from Meredith. During the title search, the closing attorney discovers that his use of the property has no limitations. What type of title does he have? Oh my gosh, this is a train wreck. Sorry. Does Stanley have? If there's no limitations, what kind of ownership is no limitations? Avulsion, that's a water thing. Alienation, we haven't even got to that. That is a thing in this course, but it has to do with foreclosures. Annexation, that's another, it's a fixture thing. Fee simple, absolute. And they could do that. They could throw in words that start with same letters. So no limitations on use. That's the best possible way to own something. Fee simple, absolute. Ron Swanson agrees to sell his land to Andy and April. The attorney discovers during their title search that Andy's and April's use of the property had a limitation. What type of deed do they have? They have some sort of limitation. Is it fee simple, determinable, condition subsequent, absolute, or defeasible? It's not absolute, because that's no limitations. Best answer from that, probably defeasible. Determinable and condition subsequent are also good options. It's just that you can't pick one without the other being wrong, right? Because of the way it's written here as answer choices. Determinable and condition subsequent and defeasible are all good options here. So defeasible is probably the best answer of these four. The Homestead Act is not something that we deal with all that much in North Carolina as much as, say, they do in Florida. But basically, it protects the home from creditors, like credit card level creditors, so as to keep them from taking the property from the owner. The home can be foreclosed if they stop paying their taxes or their mortgage, but not if they are in trouble on other types of lines of credit. There's limited exemptions depending on the age and amounts, but for the most part, different states have different rules. And in North Carolina, it's not as involved as it is in some other states. You just need to know that it's limited. So if a property owner wants to transfer their property to someone else and then have it come back to them, which option should they put into place when they sell it as a life estate? Oh, sorry. Where did they go? Sorry, guys. Thank you for letting me know. Here we go. Let me catch us up. Were those test questions showing up? Have I been off screen all this time? Okay. Sorry. Let me go back through them. There's that one. The deed, including a condition requiring something from the owner, is defeasible. And then here's the first one, Michael buying from Dwight, limited to only using the property as a farm. That would be fee simple determinable. And then Chandler buying from Phoebe, can never use the property as a business serving alcohol. Fee simple conditions subsequent was the best answer there. And then no limitations on use at all would be fee simple absolute. And then having a limitation, best answer there was defeasible. I'm sorry about that. Feel free to unmute and speak up if I'm not paying attention to the chat sometimes. Okay, there's the Homestead Act. You can take a screen cap if you need to about that. And then here's our pop quiz. What options should you put into place if you want to transfer to another and have it come back to you? Reversionary or remainderman? Yeah, reversionary means reverting back to the owner. You got it. So reversionary is the right answer there. Okay, now I'm going to shift into types of ownership. We looked at estates, but now we're going to talk about how many people are owning something. And when it's one person owning a property, they own it in severalty. I know it's like, that is stupid. Why severalty? Don't look at it as the word several. Look at it as the word sever. Sever. Think when you sever something, you cut a piece off of a thing. So sever is the best way I can think of to remember. One person or entity owning a property means the term for that is ownership in severalty. Severalty. So if you're a single person, not married, and you just buy something, maybe your first property coming fresh out of school, and you get a job and you're able to buy that little condo or that townhouse, there's no one else that you bought it with. You own it by yourself. You own it as an owner in severalty. That's probably a word that would show up in the deed. So-and-so, Fernando Reyes owns this property at 123 ABC Street as an owner in severalty because she bought it by herself. No one else. There's no partner in her ownership with it. It's when you have a co-owner that we get into these other terms that we're going to cover here in a minute. So when it is more than one person owning a property, that is, the word for that is concurrent ownership. I remember that by the Spanish word for with, con, C-O-N, con, with someone else, right? Concurrent. Concurrent means more than one person or entity owns it. Now, let's dig in. When you have multiple owners, concurrent ownership, you cannot draw a line down the middle of the property and say, you stay over there, I'll stay over here. That's not how you co-own it. This idea of unity of possession means that both owners still have access to the whole thing. It's just that financially they own different portions. They might own it 50-50. They might own it 60-40. And once they sell it, one person gets 60% of the proceeds, the other gets 40, maybe. All of that depends on some other factors. But while they own it, this idea of unity of possession means that they both have access to the whole thing, right? There are three kinds of concurrent ownership we're covering here. These words are driving me crazy. I'm going to fix them when we're done. I formatted from Canva over to PowerPoint. But anyway, let's start with tenancy by the entirety. These are the three ways that multiple people can own something. And I like to start with tenancy by the entirety. That's the way married people own property. If you're married in North Carolina, by far, the the predominant way to own property when you're married is as tenants by the entirety. Also, so you don't have to own property when you're married in this way, but you can't own property this way if you're not married. I'll say that again differently. Only married people can own a property as tenants by the entirety. It's only available to spouses to own with each other. The biggest reason for this is it has as its number one feature something called right of survivorship. So think about this. Let's say that you are divorced and you marry someone else who is also divorced. So you are both marrying somebody for the second time, and you both have adult children, and both of your sets of children are doing fine. They're healthy financially. They're great. They have their own places. They're not depending on you to help them. They don't have their hands out waiting for you to give them something. And you and your new second spouse, second chance at life spouse, married partner, decide to buy a beach condo, and you buy it together. You're buying this thing together, and you're choosing to own it as tenants by the entirety. It's not important either because of your preferences or necessity that if you ever were to sell it or ever were to die, that it goes to your heirs. They're okay. You don't need to take care of them. The kids are fine. With that said, how would you like to own this condo so that if you die, what happens to it? What would you want to happen to it when you died in this situation? That the other person owns all of it, right? That's what right of survivorship means. When one of the spouses or partners or owners dies, the other owner owns all of it. As opposed to what? As opposed to when one of the spouses dies, the heirs get it. That's not what's happening with tenants by the entirety. With tenants by the entirety, it has this thing called right of survivorship. The survivor gets to own all of it. Now, at that point, once you're dead and they've gotten all of it, they are in ownership in severalty because they're the only owner. You with me? So, tenants by the entirety is only for married people. And you must be married at the time you buy the thing in order to be able to be a tenant by the entirety. Both people must sign in order to sell it. Both married spouses have to sign off agreeing to sell it. You can't sell it without the other one knowing. There's a saying called, it takes one to buy and two to sell. Both people have to sign and be aware that it's being sold. You can't sell it as a surprise, in other words. There's no right to partition. A couple of bullet points down. That means that you can't sue your spouse and say, look, I want to get the money out of this thing and go do something else with it, and I'm going to force you to sell it. You can't do that. You can on the other kinds of ownership that we're going to see in a minute, but not on this one. Tenants by the entirety cannot sue each other for the right to partition or the right to sell. I'm going to sue you so that we can sell it so that I can get my financial peace and do whatever it is I want to do. It's by far the favored ownership for spouses in North Carolina. And if you're married and you close on a house, unless you tell the attorney otherwise, they're going to assume and write it up that you're going to own this thing as tenants by the entirety. Because they're going to know that you're married. They're going to ask you, and they're going to see, oh, this person's married, and they're buying this thing, and therefore we're going to write up the deed saying that they own it as tenants by the entirety. But you may not want them to. You don't have to own it if you're married. You don't have to own it as tenants by the entirety. That's an option for you, but it's only available to married people. Why might you not want to? If you're married, why might it be that you don't want to own this thing as tenants by the entirety? Maybe because you are buying it as an investment property and you're the real estate expert and your spouse has a real regular job at the bank and they don't care what you're doing with your real estate. They trust you. You know what you're doing. They do their thing. You do your thing, and you buy and sell lots of properties. And so they don't need to own this one as tenants by the entirety. This one is some other way. Yeah, you could always change your deed. Good question. Rebecca says, can you change the way you own it once you have kids if you wanted them to inherit it? Long as all the parties that are listed on the deed are in agreement, you could certainly go to an attorney and pay them to change the deed as needed. So that's tenants by the entirety. It's only for married people, but it's not the only way married people can choose to own it. They could choose the other ways too. What are the other ways? The other ways are tenants in common and joint tenancy. Let's start with let me see here. Let's start with joint tenancy. It's not legally favored. North Carolina doesn't really like joint tenancy, but I like to go to it next because it offers right of survivorship. It's a way for unmarried people to have that feature called survivorship built in. Maybe you don't want to marry the person that you're owning this property with, but you still want it to be set up so that when one of you dies, the other one gets to own all of it, right? For whatever reason, that's what you want. You don't want to leave it to either of your heirs. One of you dies, you buy it together, the other one owns all of it. You have that right of survivorship. You would use joint tenancy to make sure that happens. Now, by the way, in real life, you could pretty much have an attorney draw up any of these in pretty much the way you want them to be drawn up. But we need to start somewhere, and you just need to know the fundamentals of what it means when we say joint tenancy, tenants in common, and tenants by the entirety. But in real life, they're mostly all kind of pretty customizable. And also, as a broker in real life, if somebody asks you, what is this about? You could tell them what the definition of joint tenancy and tenants in common, but you would never say, and so I think you should do this. That's legal advice. You would point them to an attorney real fast, right? In real life. You just need to know the gist of it. So, joint tenancy, we don't do it that much around here in North Carolina. And if we want actual true joint tenancy, the attorney would have to be very specific to certain case law about making sure legal language is carefully inserted into this deed to accomplish the joint tenant status, the goals of joint tenancy. They would have to be super good at writing it just perfectly. Otherwise, something could go wrong. The wrong phrase could be in there, and then it's legally not going to be considered joint tenancy. We can accomplish a lot with the other two forms of ownership and not even need to use this. So most types of ownership in North Carolina are either going to be tenants by the entirety for the married people only, or tenants in common. But this is still a thing, could be utilized. But again, very exact specific language has to be put into the deed to make it proper joint tenancy, if that's what you're trying to do. So essentially, joint tenancy allows for right of survivorship without being married. Other things about it are some unities of ownership interest. The unity of possession, unity of interest, of time, and of title. So the unity of time, let's look at that one. Sorry, I've got some overlap again. Unity of time in joint tenancy is what that's supposed to say. We've got a case here where 3 people own the property. Jim, Pam, and Toby own the property. They all own it as joint tenants. In order for them to be considered joint tenants, they had to buy it at the same time. A year down the road, and Toby gets tired of living with Jim and Pam, and so Toby sells his part to Oscar. Well, Oscar wasn't around. He wasn't one of the original buyers. Therefore, Oscar owns it as a tenant in common. He cannot be a joint tenant because he didn't buy it originally when it was originally purchased. So that's a little nuance about joint tenancy. Unity of time, you're only a joint tenant if you're in on it when the purchase happened originally. Oscar joins in. He can be the owner, co-owner now, but he can't be a joint tenant because he wasn't there when it was originally bought. Right of survivorship, we've got, let's say, Pam and Jim again, also Kelly and Toby. Let's say they, in joint tenancy, by the way, you own it in equal amounts with each other. If there's 4 of you, each of you own 25% of it. If it's 3 of you, each of you own 33 1/3 of it. If it's 2 of you, each of you own 50-50. In this case, there's 4 owners, so there's 25% each. Kelly dies, and let's say that she has a will, and in her will, she leaves her share to her spouse and kids. But don't forget, in joint tenancy, it has this thing called right of survivorship, which says that if one owner dies, the rest of the owners get all of it when that owner dies. If she tries to leave her share to her spouse and kids, what's really going to happen to the property if she owns it as a joint tenant? Her wishes won't matter. Her spouse and kids are not getting it. It's going to Jim and Pam and Toby, not to her spouse and kids. You with me? Because joint tenancy has right of survivorship. Sorry, Kelly. You should have thought about this before you were in the situation. You should have told them, the other co-owners, look, I don't like this deal. I want to be able to leave it to my kids. Let's all get together and go to the attorney and have them change it from joint tenancy into the other one, which is called tenants in common. That one allows for me to leave it to my heirs when I die. But if it's still joint tenancy when she dies, then the spouse and kids are out of luck. The other co-owners are getting all of it. Now, Jim, Pam, and Toby are the 3 owners, each owning 33 1/3, right? There is no leaving it to heirs with joint tenancy. So her wishes cannot be met. It now looks like this, 1/3 to each. Joint tenancy has right of survivorship, says the remaining 3 owners get the property instead of her heirs. All right, so that's joint. Let's go back to the other kind of ownership. Let's do this one first. Sorry. Here we go. Tenancy in common. This is the most common way that multiple people own property who are not married. If you're not married and you own property with other people in North Carolina, it's probably going to be as a tenant in common, as tenants in common. 2 or more people owning it, concurrent owners, it's the most common way. But don't forget, married people could choose to own property as tenants in common instead of tenants by the entirety. Why might they want to do that? Maybe they're buying it with their college buddy. It's the married spouses plus a 3rd person, and they're all going to buy this thing together. And so they wouldn't be able to do joint tenancy. They would do tenants in common. Or back to that other example, one spouse has like a real regular job, and then the other spouse is the real estate investor, and she buys and sells stuff all the time. He's like, do your thing. We don't need to be tenants by the entirety. You just buy as a tenant in common if you want to. Or if he's in on one of them, he can still be a tenant in common on that one. In tenancy in common, you can have that unequal ownership interest as well. It's not like joint tenancy where everybody owns the same proportion. You can have 60-40, and I like to use this example. Maybe we have a couple who are dating, but not, they're maybe dating, but not engaged or not married. And she's got her act together and she makes good money, and he's just still kind of finding himself, and he's pretty. She likes him, but he's just kind of, he's maybe artsy or something, and he's just kind of doesn't have much financially to the table. And she's like, I love you and everything, but I put $20,000 toward the down payment. You only put $10,000 toward the down payment. We're not owning this 50-50. We're going to own this 80-20 or 60-40, right? Got to make sense for me, right? So they would need to own it as tenants in common in order to be unequal owners. The other thing involving that same example, What if that dating couple, not engaged, not married, own it as tenants in common, and he's artsy and he's wild and carefree, and he goes bungee jumping and the cord is too long and he dies? Who owns it now? He doesn't have kids, but he has parents, by the way. Who are the owners of this property? There is no right of survivorship. She does not own the whole thing. Who are his heirs? He doesn't have kids. The next in line are his parents. And wouldn't you know it, his parents hate her. And she hates his parents. So now she's gotten into a situation where she has co-owners that she doesn't like, right? So be careful, right, with tenants in common. That's just part of it. No right of survivorship. Now you can leave it to your heirs. Hopefully you like the heirs that you're going to be owners with. Also, the individual shares can be inherited or sold without the consent of your co-owners. They could show up one day and you have sold your portion to two other people, for that matter. You could encumber your portion by a lien or by a mortgage. And you could also buy at different times. So two of them could have bought this year, and then a third one maybe comes in and buys a portion, buys into it. So tenants in common can buy at different times. They don't all have to buy at the same time. Any owner can sell or will their interest without their partner's consent. So we've got Jim and Pam and Toby. Toby sells his 40% share because Pam owns 33% and Jim owns 27%. And that leaves 40% that Toby owns. Toby could sell his 40% not to one person, but to two different people. He sells Creed and Phyllis, and Creed buys 15% of it and Phyllis buys 25%. That adds up to 40. So now it turned into a 4-person ownership instead of a 3. So you can have uneven amounts, buy at different times, sell it without permission of your co-owners. And then there's that right to partition. If people are unhappy with each other, I'm out of here, I want to get out, I want to take my money and go. Well, I don't want to sell. Too bad. I'm suing you for my right to partition. Says you're going to have to sell it so that I can take my chunk of money and get out of here. You can force the other to sell through the right to partition. Let's compare the two. So the difference again between tenants in common and joint tenancy. Tenants in common allows for unequal shares. Joint tenancy is going to be equal shares. Tenants in common allows for buying at different times. Joint, you have to buy at the same time for it to still be a joint tenant. And then tenants in common allows for leaving to their heirs, their ownership portion. And then joint tenancy has right of survivorship. The remaining owners own the full property. Don't forget, on the national portion of the exam, you could run into this stuff, and that joint tenancy is not something favored in North Carolina, but you could run into questions about joint tenancy on the national part of the exam. So if you are co-owners with somebody, and you both want the fewest possible limitations on your ownership, which type of ownership or tenancy would you be going for? With the fewest limitations. The best would be tenants in common. Yep, you got it. Because tenants by the entirety requires that you're married if you choose to use it. Joint tenancy has more hard and fast rules than does tenants in common. Let's clean up a couple of things here. Let's see. If a single person buys property and then later gets married, how do they own it? That tenants by the entirety does not automatically kick in. They are still, the newly married person is not automatically on the deed. You would add them to the deed. They don't automatically become tenants by the entirety. If they're both on the deed, though, they're going to be tenants in common. If they want to own it as tenants by the entirety, they need to go to the attorney and say, hey, let's switch this over to by the entirety. And then when they both sell, you can't sell it without the other party knowing. So both spouses would have to sign the deed, transferring the property to the new owner. Have to have a signature from both of them. How does tenants by the entirety go away? How do we terminate tenancy by the entirety? Well, death terminates it because now you have ownership in severalty, just one owner. Legal agreement, you just decide to undo it legally and you fill out the paperwork properly, yeah. Divorce, which brings up a situation you run into as a broker. Sometimes people get a little loose with their definition of divorced and they say, oh, we're divorced. Okay, I'm here to list the property and you're telling me you're divorced, so sounds like I only need to get your signature. And then you find out, well, actually, you know, we have kids, and because of the kids, we live separately. We haven't bothered to officially go through with the divorce, but we're practically divorced. Okay, now we have a problem. Now I can't just list it with your signature only. I need theirs too in order to list this property because there's still two owners. There's no, may I see the divorce agreement? Can I see the thing? Oh, well, that's when they start saying the truth. Oh, we're not actually divorced. We've been split up for 10 years. I actually ran into this once. It was a girl I had dated 4 or 5 years earlier. And after me, she dated a guy and they got married, had a kid, and then split up. And then she called me to sell the property. And she said, well, he and I aren't together anymore, but we're amicable because of our kid. And I'm like, okay, fine, but I need his signature on the listing agreement. She said, oh, that's okay. He'll do whatever I tell him to do because we're cool like that. And it actually worked. Of course, I'm thinking, yeah, okay, whatever. I'm sure this is going to be miserable, but it worked out fine. He actually did. They did have a good relationship and we closed. So a legal separation agreement does not change the form of ownership. It's got to be an actual done deal divorce that would terminate tenancy by the entirety. That's the gist of joint tenants in common and tenants by the entirety. Let's talk about a couple kinds of hybrid forms of ownership when it comes to the property itself, and then we'll be done here in a couple minutes. So there's 4 kinds of hybrid ownership. There's something called a condominium. There's a townhouse. There's a co-op or a cooperative, and there's a timeshare. And we're going to kind of look into each of those. The condominium, what do you own when you own a condo? You don't own the exterior. You basically own painted surface to painted surface, the airspace. That's the deal with the condo. You don't own the thickness of the walls. The roof is not your responsibility. You just need to be concerned with the painted surface to painted surface space. And by the way, we have an insurance chapter, and we'll learn in that chapter that there's a whole different kind of insurance policy used when it's a condominium. You don't use the same kind of insurance policy coverage when you own a house, single family house, as when you own a condo, because you don't need all of the structure kind of protection. You just need the interior airspace protection. Mostly it's your personal property. So here's the gist of it. In a condominium, there's at least a bare minimum of common area. It could even just be hallways and elevators. It doesn't have to be super fancy, tennis courts and pools. It could be. But that area that you share the use of with the other owners, most of whom you probably don't even know, that's called common area. And who owns it? You and them together. All the unit owners own the common area as tenants in common. There's a familiar phrase. We just learned about tenants in common, right? So tenants in common, you and the co-owners, you and the other owners of the other units, I should say, all of you together own the common areas as tenants in common. So you've got a couple of things happening, two kinds of ownership. You own the unit that you live in as a fee simple something or other. By the way, it could be fee simple absolute. I hope it is. Or it could be defeasible, or it could be for the life of another, for that matter. You also own the common area with your other condo people as tenants in common. And in that condo, you might have some various sections. You've got some common elements, maybe like the pool and the weight room that's available to everybody. But then maybe for an extra fee, some of the common elements include like a boat slip or a garage space. Not everybody has a garage, but you pay extra, so you do. So those would be called limited common elements. We'll do this next bit and then we're done for the evening. The North Carolina Condominium Act of 1986 is for new construction condominiums only. So only new build condominiums. It does not apply to townhouses or planned unit developments, PUDs. For new construction condominiums, here's the deal. The developer has to provide some things. The developer has to provide and record for public record, tell the whole world, here's a plat map of the layout of the community. And they have to record the declaration of the condominium complex. Here's what it includes. Here's what's going on out here. The developer also has to create an owners association that makes decisions on making sure people are following the rules properly. And you can't see it too well. I'll get this fixed for when we come back again. That last bullet point is really important. The Condominium Act, for new construction condominiums, it's required that you allow a 7-day rescission period. A new construction buyer of a condominium, a buyer of a new construction condominium, must be given 7 days to have buyer's remorse and back out if they want to. If it's a new one, not a resale condo. You don't get it with the resale. But for a new construction condo in North Carolina, you have 7 days to back out. That's a 7-day right of rescission. That's all under the Condo Act of 1986. You with me? All right. We're going to finish out chapter 2 when we come back on, tomorrow. And we're just continuing in order. 2, then 3, then 4. So we'll get into 2 and 3, and we'll probably get into 4 as well. So I hope you're reading ahead, and I'll see you tomorrow. Put your name in the chat before you leave, and I hope you have a good 24 hours.
Thank you.
You're welcome.